The elevator stopped, and with it, everything Ethan Cole thought he knew about trust. What happens when the walls close in, the lights flicker out, and the person trapped beside you whispers a confession that could destroy empires? Ethan Cole, a single father just trying to protect his daughter's future, found himself sealed in steel with a CEO who'd already been sentenced to disappear. What he discovered in that darkness would cost him everything: his career, his safety, his faith in the system. But some truths are worth the price. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The elevator had been falling for 3 seconds before Ethan Cole's brain caught up with his body. Not falling exactly. Lurching, dropping in sudden, sickening jolts that sent his stomach into his throat and his hand instinctively toward the rail. The fluorescent panels overhead flickered once, twice, then died completely, leaving only the emergency strip lighting along the floor, a pale, ghostly glow that turned the small steel box into something that felt less like transportation and more like a coffin. The metal screamed, that was the only word for it. A high-pitched shriek of steel against steel, of machinery fighting forces it wasn't designed to handle, of systems failing in real time. Ethan's knees buckled slightly, his body compensating for motion his inner ear couldn't quite process. His briefcase hit the floor with a hollow thud. Then silence. Not the comfortable silence of a pause, but the terrible silence of something broken. The kind of quiet that pressed against eardrums and made hearts beat louder just to fill the void. Ethan's breath came steady, deliberately steady. Panic was a luxury, and luxuries were things he'd learned to live without. When your daughter asks why there's only pasta again for dinner, you don't panic. When the school calls about unpaid activity fees, you don't panic. When the car makes a sound that definitely means expensive, you breathe, you calculate, you solve. So he breathed. 4 counts in. Hold, 6 counts out. A rhythm his therapist had taught him in the months after Sarah left, when Lily was still too young to understand why Mommy only visited on alternating weekends, and even those were becoming less frequent. The emergency lighting cast everything in sharp relief. Angles and shadows, no middle ground. Ethan could see his own reflection in the polished steel doors, distorted and strange. 38 years old, looking closer to 45. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Hair that needed cutting but wouldn't get it until next month's budget allowed. A suit that was good quality once, back when he'd worked for the big firms, before he'd chosen independence over advancement, honesty over advancement. He wasn't alone. The realization came with a delay, his mind so focused on assessing the mechanical situation that it had temporarily filed away the other human presence as secondary data. But now, in the settling quiet, he became acutely aware of her. Rebecca Sloan stood against the opposite wall, one hand pressed flat against the steel, as if she could feel the building's pulse through it. She was exactly as she appeared in the company materials Ethan had reviewed before taking this contract. Mid-40s, silver threading through dark hair she wore pulled back severely. A navy suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. But the photos hadn't captured the way she held herself, coiled tension wrapped in corporate polish, or the intelligence in her eyes that seemed to be calculating a dozen variables simultaneously. CEO of Meridian Holdings, a company large enough to have its own cafeteria but small enough that the CEO still personally approved major expenditures. The kind of mid-sized firm where everyone knew everyone, where the pension plan wasn't just numbers on a screen but actual retirements for actual people. Ethan had been hired 3 weeks ago for what was supposed to be a routine compliance audit. The board wanted an independent review of their financial controls, standard practice, boring work, exactly the kind of contract that paid Lily's after-school program fees and kept the electricity on. Except nothing about the past 3 weeks had felt routine. "Are you hurt?" Rebecca's voice cut through the silence, professional and controlled, but with an undercurrent that suggested the control was costing her something. "No." Ethan bent to retrieve his briefcase, checking the latch. Inside his laptop and 3 days of printed financial records. Safe. "You?" "Fine." She was already moving, pressing the emergency call button with one manicured finger. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. She picked up the emergency phone, listened, then replaced it carefully in its cradle. Dead. Expected. Ethan examined the floor indicator panel. They'd been heading down from the 15th floor, Rebecca's office level, to the lobby. The display was dark. "Power's out, at least to this car. They'll have us moving soon." "Will they?" Something in her tone made Ethan look up from the panel. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the corner of the elevator ceiling, where a small dark dome marked a security camera. "No camera in here," she said quietly. Not to him, to herself, to the universe. A statement of fact that felt like a confession. Ethan followed her gaze. She was right. The dome was empty, just a housing with no actual equipment inside. Strange. He'd noticed cameras everywhere else in this building. Lobbies, hallways, stairwells, the kind of coverage that suggested either serious security concerns or serious security theater, but not here, in the executive elevator. "That's unusual," Ethan said carefully. Rebecca laughed, a sound without humor. "Is it? Or is it convenient?" She finally looked at him directly, and Ethan saw something in her expression that made his auditor's instincts flare to life. Fear, yes. But more than that, recognition. The look of someone who just had a suspicion confirmed. "Ms. Sloan?" "Rebecca." She pushed away from the wall, pacing the small space with the controlled energy of a caged predator. 3 steps one way, pivot, 3 steps back. "If we're going to be stuck in here together, first names seem appropriate." "Rebecca." Ethan set his briefcase down deliberately, giving himself time to think. "What's going on?" "You're the auditor. You tell me." She stopped pacing, fixing him with a gaze that had probably intimidated countless boardrooms. 3 weeks you've been here. What have you found?" This was dangerous territory. Ethan had rules about discussing preliminary findings, especially with subjects of the audit, and especially when those subjects were CEOs with the power to end contracts with a phone call. But they were trapped in a steel box with no cameras, and Rebecca Sloan was asking questions like someone who already knew the answers and was just waiting to see if he'd tell the truth. "Irregularities," Ethan said finally. "Nothing concrete yet. Patterns that don't quite align, vendor payments that clear too quickly, maintenance schedules that don't match actual work orders." "The pension fund?" Ethan's silence was answer enough. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, a crack in the corporate armor. When she opened them again, something had shifted, a decision made. "How long?" she asked. "I'm sorry?" "How long have they been stealing from it?" The question hung in the recycled air between them. Ethan could feel his heart rate elevating despite his breathing exercises. This wasn't how these conversations went. Clients didn't ask, auditors didn't tell. There were protocols, procedures, chains of command. "I don't have proof yet," Ethan said carefully. "Just inconsistencies. Numbers that look too clean. Transactions that route through intermediary accounts before final posting. It could be legitimate restructuring. But you don't think it is?" "No." The word came out before Ethan could stop it, before professional caution could override gut instinct. "No, I don't." Rebecca nodded slowly, as if he'd just confirmed something she'd been dreading. She returned to the wall, but this time she slid down it, sitting on the floor with her back against the steel, knees drawn up slightly. The CEO facade cracked further. Ethan saw exhaustion underneath it, the kind that came from fighting battles on too many fronts for too long. "Logan Reed," she said to the floor. "My CFO. How close are you to proving it?" Logan Reed. Ethan had met him twice. Polished, confident, the kind of finance executive who spoke in smooth generalities and gave tours of spreadsheets without actually showing you anything meaningful. He'd been helpful in setting up Ethan's access to systems. Almost too helpful, making sure to point out all the proper channels and approved data sources. "Close enough that someone's noticed I'm looking," Ethan admitted. He remained standing, but moved to sit on his briefcase, bringing himself closer to eye level with her. "My system access has been getting progressively limited. Every few days, another folder I can't open, another database that requires special permissions. Always with reasonable explanations, regulatory compliance, privacy concerns, pending deals that need confidentiality. He's boxing you in. Efficiently." Ethan respected the craftsmanship even as he despised the purpose. Whoever's running this knows how audits work. They're not blocking me completely. That would be too obvious. Just slowing me down, limiting what I can see, making sure I have to ask permission for every deep dive. And you think it's Logan? I think it's someone with CFO-level access and board-level protection. Ethan pulled out his phone, no signal, as expected, and opened his notes app, scrolling through 3 weeks of observations. The pension fund looks perfect. That's the problem. 23 years of contribution data, every employee properly credited, every employer match properly recorded, every quarterly statement pristine. That sounds good. It's too good. Ethan found the entry he was looking for. Human organizations make mistakes. Typos happen. Accounts get miscategorized and later corrected. But this fund? Flawless. Like someone went back and cleaned everything, made it all perfect. Or built it perfect from scratch, Rebecca said quietly, to hide what's underneath. There's a subsidiary fund, Strategic Growth Initiative, mentioned in footnotes but never detailed. Money flows in from the pension plan quarterly. Investment reallocations for optimized returns. The language is technical enough to sound legitimate. But I can't find where the money actually goes. The Strategic Growth Initiative has an account number, transaction logs showing inflows, but when I try to trace the investments themselves, Ethan made a gesture like trying to catch smoke. Permissions required, special access, pending documentation. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing. Somewhere in the building, something groaned. Settling structure or distant machinery, Ethan couldn't tell. The emergency lighting flickered but held. How much? She finally asked. If I'm right? Conservatively? Ethan did the mental math he'd been avoiding putting in writing. 7 million over 3 years, maybe more. He watched the number land, watched Rebecca's jaw tighten, her hands curl into fists against her thighs. $7 million. For a company Meridian's size, not enough to trigger immediate alarm bells. Spread over 3 years across hundreds of employee accounts, in amounts small enough that no individual would notice their retirement shrinking by percentages rather than dramatic chunks. 347 people, Rebecca said, her voice hollow. That's how many employees we have with active pensions. Some of them have been here since the company started. Jim in maintenance, he's 62, planning to retire next year. Sandra in HR has grandkids in college, counting on that money. And we've been... She couldn't finish. You didn't know, Ethan said. Not a question, but a statement. I should have. Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger now, directed inward. I'm the CEO. The buck stops with me. Every quarter Logan presents the financial overview. Every quarter the pension fund is listed as stable and growing. Every quarter I sign off on it without demanding deeper proof because I trusted... She cut herself off. I trusted the wrong person. Trust is efficient, Ethan offered, repeating something his old mentor used to say. Until it isn't. You can't personally verify every number in a company this size. That's why organizations have checks and balances, separation of duties, audit committees. Which Logan chairs? Rebecca laughed bitterly. He built himself a perfect fortress. CFO controlling the data, audit committee chair controlling the oversight, friendship with enough board members to deflect suspicion. Not perfect, Ethan corrected. You brought in an outside auditor. Did I? Rebecca looked at him with sudden intensity. Or did the board require it? I thought it was my idea suggested in our last quarterly meeting as prudent governance. But now I'm wondering who planted the seed. Who made it seem like the responsible choice? Ethan felt pieces clicking into place, his pattern recognition instincts assembling a bigger picture. An outside auditor who could be controlled, limited access, short timeline, narrow scope. Someone who'd do a surface review, find nothing wrong, provide third-party validation. But they got you instead. They got someone who needed the work badly enough to take a contract on short notice, Ethan said honestly. Someone without a big firm's resources, but with enough experience to know what questions to ask. I probably looked perfect on paper, desperate enough to not rock the boat. They didn't account for the fact that desperation can run both ways. Rebecca tilted her head, studying him. You need this contract. But you can't afford to stamp approval on fraud. Not if you want to keep your license, your reputation, your ability to feed your daughter. Ethan felt his expression freeze. He hadn't mentioned Lily, hadn't mentioned his personal life at all beyond the basic background check that came with the contract. Rebecca caught his reaction. I read people's files, Ethan. It's not stalking, it's due diligence. Single father, full custody, daughter, age 6. You left Hartman Associates 18 months ago. They said philosophical differences. You said you wanted to prioritize family time. You started your own practice. Small client list, steady work, nothing spectacular, but nothing failed either. You're careful, methodical, honest. You make honest sound like a character flaw. In this situation, it might be. Rebecca pushed herself back to standing, brushing invisible dust from her suit. They're going to offer you money. When you get close, when the evidence becomes undeniable, Logan or someone from the board will make it worth your while to see things differently. Frame it as pragmatism, the company's future, shareholder value, all the usual justifications. I won't take it. No, you won't. She said it with certainty, which is why you're dangerous. Why this, she gestured at the elevator around them, might not be an accident. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. You think someone deliberately stopped this elevator? Ethan asked slowly. I think I received a message this morning. Rebecca pulled her phone from her pocket, unlocked it, and handed it to Ethan. The screen showed a text from an unknown number, timestamp 6:47 a.m. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. Private discussion requested first. Your office, 2:30. Come alone. There are concerns. Concerns, Ethan repeated. Vague but threatening. Exactly. And then at 2:15 you messaged asking if we could meet to discuss your findings. I said to come up. We got in this elevator at 2:28. Ethan checked his watch. 2:34 p.m. 6 minutes trapped. It felt longer. You think someone's watching your schedule, knew you'd be in this elevator at this time. I think someone knew we'd both be in this elevator. Together, private, no cameras. Rebecca took her phone back. What better way to send a message? Trap the CEO with the auditor who's getting too close. A little scare. A reminder that accidents happen, that systems fail. That's, Ethan wanted to say paranoid, but the word died in his throat. Because he'd been in this business long enough to know that financial criminals weren't idiots. They were often the smartest people in the room, and they absolutely thought through contingencies. That's calculated. Logan is very calculated. Rebecca began pacing again. 3 weeks ago, he suggested I take a sabbatical, said I looked stressed, that the company would benefit from fresh perspective in leadership. Frame it as personal growth, mental health, taking time, very modern and supportive. Forcing you out while sounding like they're caring for you. He even offered to handle the transition himself. Temporary CEO role, keep everything stable until I'm ready to return. The quotes dripped with acid. And I almost considered it. I am tired. I am stressed. Running this company while watching it slowly being dismantled from within, it's exhausting. But you didn't take the sabbatical. I told him I'd think about it, asked for more time. Rebecca stopped pacing. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've been watching, paying attention to patterns I should have noticed earlier. Logan stays late, always has good reasons. Board members have private dinners I'm not invited to. Boring operational stuff. Didn't want to waste your time. My assistant, who I've had for 6 years, suddenly put in for a transfer to another department. When I asked why, she said she'd been offered a promotion by Logan. Isolating you. Systematically. And I think the board meeting today, the real one, not whatever trap they're planning at 3 p.m., I think they're going to vote on my future, whether to accept my voluntary resignation for personal reasons or force the issue. Ethan absorbed this, his auditor's mind building the structure of the scheme. It was elegant in its cruelty. Embezzle from the pension fund slowly, carefully. Build power through board relationships. Isolate the CEO. Force her out before she can discover the theft. Install yourself as replacement. Continue the fraud, or better yet, engineer a company sale that buries the evidence in transition chaos. Everyone wins except the employees counting on those pensions. Why tell me this? Ethan asked. If they're monitoring you this closely, talking to me makes you more vulnerable. Because you're the only person in this building I can trust. Rebecca met his eyes. You're not invested in company politics. You have no reason to protect Logan or the board. Your incentive structure is simple. Do the audit correctly or lose your license. And because you're a father who packs his daughter's lunch every morning and checks her homework every night and attends parent-teacher conferences even when clients are demanding your time. Your calendar app syncs to your work email. I saw the blocks. Lily school pickup. Lily soccer practice. Lily dentist. You structure your entire professional life around a 6-year-old's schedule. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. That kind of person doesn't take bribes. That kind of person cares about right and wrong in ways that can't be compromised. Ethan felt exposed and uncomfortable. He'd kept his personal life compartmentalized precisely to avoid this kind of assessment, this vulnerability. But Rebecca was right. He couldn't be bought. Not when the alternative was looking his daughter in the eye and explaining why Daddy had helped bad people steal from good ones. A sudden lurch interrupted his thoughts. The elevator groaned, lights flickering. Then, with a mechanical sigh, it began to move. Smoothly. Normally. As if the past several minutes of crisis had been imaginary. They both watched the floor indicator come back to life. 14, 13, 12. That's convenient timing, Ethan observed, almost like someone was listening. Rebecca straightened her suit, the CEO mask sliding back into place with visible effort. When these doors open, we've never had this conversation. Understood. But, Ethan? She waited until he looked at her. Be careful. Logan's not alone in this. He can't be. The board exposure, the access required, the sustained effort, this is a conspiracy, not a solo operation, which means people with power and resources have decided you're expendable. I'm always careful. Careful might not be enough. The elevator settled to a stop, a soft ding announcing their arrival. Watch your back. Keep copies of everything off-site. Don't trust building security, IT support, or anyone who seems too helpful. The doors opened onto the lobby. Marble floors, afternoon sun streaming through tall windows, the pleasant murmur of a functioning business. 2 security guards stood by the elevator bay, looking bored and unhelpful. Everything all right? One asked, perfunctory. Just a minor delay, Rebecca said smoothly, stepping out. Someone should check the maintenance logs for car 3. Yes, ma'am. Ethan followed her into the lobby, briefcase in hand. Around them, Meridian Holdings continued its normal operations. Employees heading to late meetings, delivery personnel navigating package routing, the coffee station doing brisk business. A completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca walked away without looking back, heels clicking against marble, already pulling out her phone to deal with whatever CEO crisis demanded attention next. To any observer, they were what they appeared to be. Executive and contractor, brief elevator inconvenience, nothing to see here. But Ethan stood still for a moment, watching people move through the space. 347 employees with pensions, Jim in maintenance, 62, planning retirement. Sandra in HR with grandkids in college. Real people counting on promises made, contracts signed, systems that were supposed to protect them. His phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Lily pickup, 3:45 p.m. 2 hours from now. Enough time to get back to his temporary office, download the files he'd been compiling, create backups like Rebecca suggested. Enough time to decide if he was really going to do this. If he was going to risk his career, his safety, maybe his ability to provide for his daughter, all to chase down proof of something that powerful people clearly wanted buried. Ethan thought about the elevator, the convenient timing of its failure and recovery, the lack of cameras. Rebecca's fear wrapped in corporate professionalism. He thought about $7 million stolen in amounts too small to trigger individual alarm. Theft calibrated precisely to exploit human psychology. People didn't panic over percentage points, only dramatic losses. He thought about his daughter, 6 years old, who asked him every night about his day and listened with genuine interest to his boring explanations of accounting principles, who trusted that Daddy did good work, important work, work that mattered. Ethan adjusted his briefcase and walked toward the building exit. He'd been careful his entire career, methodical, rule-following. It had cost him the big promotions, the prestigious partnerships, the corner offices. He'd chosen integrity over advancement so many times that it had become automatic, a reflex. But careful wasn't going to solve this. Methodical wasn't going to protect those pensions. Rule following wouldn't help when the people writing the rules were the same ones breaking them. Outside, the afternoon air was cool and sharp. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, watching traffic pass, watching people hurry toward wherever their lives took them. Normal people living normal lives, trusting that systems worked, that promises meant something. His phone was in his hand before he consciously decided to act. He opened his secure notes app and began typing. Strategic Growth Initiative, deeper analysis needed. Request. Full transaction history, beneficiary documentation, investment prospectus. Legal basis. Section 404 Compliance Review, Fiduciary Duty Verification. He attached it to an email addressed to Logan Reed, copied the full audit committee, and included Rebecca Sloan. His finger hovered over Send. This was the moment. Cross this line, and there was no going back. Logan would know Ethan was specifically targeting the pension fund. The audit committee would be alerted. Rebecca would be forced to either support the inquiry or distance herself. Ethan would become visible, marked, dangerous. Or he could delete the email, continue the surface-level audit, find enough minor issues to justify his fee, write a report that noted concerns but lacked hard evidence, and move on. Keep his daughter safe, keep the rent paid, survive to fight another day. Except there wouldn't be another day. Not for Jim at 62, not for Sandra's grandkids, not for the 347 people counting on promises. Ethan pressed Send. The email went out into the digital void, irrevocable. Somewhere in this building, servers would process it, route it, deliver it to inboxes. Logan Reed would read it and understand that the careful, methodical auditor had just declared war. Ethan's phone rang immediately. Unknown number. He stared at it for 3 rings, then answered. Mr. Cole? A woman's voice, professional and cold. This is Amanda Pierce from Meridian Holdings Board Administration. We need to schedule an immediate meeting regarding your audit scope and methodology. Are you available at 4 p.m. today? After Lily's pickup. Of course. I have a prior commitment at that time, Ethan said evenly. I can do 5:30 p.m. This is rather urgent. 5:30 p.m. or tomorrow morning, your choice. A pause. Calculation happening on the other end. 5:30 p.m. Conference room C, 14th floor. Please bring all work product related to your current inquiries. The line went dead. Ethan checked his watch, 3 hours until the meeting. Just enough time to pick up Lily, drop her with his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd become his emergency backup over the past year, and prepare for whatever was coming. He started walking toward his car, mind already running through contingencies. They'd try to intimidate him first, suggest he'd overstepped, misunderstood his scope, made rookie errors. When that didn't work, they'd offer incentives, better contracts, referrals to other companies, maybe even a full-time position with benefits and security. And when that didn't work, they'd threaten. License complaints, reputation attacks, legal action for breach of confidentiality. Ethan had seen this playbook before, just never targeted at him personally. He'd always been too small, too careful, too far beneath notice. But he'd watched it happen to others, watched good auditors get crushed by systems designed to protect the guilty. His car was old, reliable, the kind of vehicle that said responsible parent rather than successful professional. Ethan got in, started the engine, and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel. The elevator had been a warning. The phone call was escalation. The 5:30 meeting would be the ultimatum. But none of it mattered if he couldn't prove the theft. Email demands for documentation were one thing. Actual evidence was another. Logan had been building this scheme for 3 years, maybe longer. He wasn't going to hand over the smoking gun just because Ethan asked nicely, which meant Ethan needed to find it himself. He pulled out his laptop, still in the parking garage, and logged into the Meridian Holdings system. His access credentials still worked. They hadn't cut him off yet, probably wanting to see what he accessed, how much he knew. Ethan navigated to the pension fund database, past the pristine summary reports to the raw transaction logs. Thousands of entries, millions of data points. Somewhere in this digital haystack was proof, He filtered for transactions over $10,000, then over $50,000, exports to external accounts, transfers to the Strategic Growth Initiative. There. A pattern. Every quarter, on the 15th of the month following quarter end, a transfer, always marked as strategic reallocation or investment optimization. Always to account SGI 2847. Always processed after business hours. Always approved by Logan Reed. Ethan drilled deeper into SGI 2847. The account existed in the system, but with minimal detail. No investment prospectus, no beneficiary documentation, just an account number and quarterly inflows totaling millions. But there were digital crumbs. There had to be. No system was perfectly clean. He checked the audit logs. Who accessed what, when. Logan's name appeared frequently, but always during business hours. Always looking like normal CFO oversight. Nothing suspicious if you didn't know what you were looking for. But there. Another name. David Kelso, IT Systems Administrator. Late-night access to the pension database. 3 sessions last month alone, all after 11 p.m. Ethan cross-referenced David's access against actual system maintenance tickets. No correlation. The late-night sessions weren't official maintenance, they were something else. He was onto something. But onto something wasn't proof. It was suspicion, pattern. The kind of thing that got him killed in a parking garage or pushed in front of a subway if this conspiracy ran as deep as Rebecca feared. Ethan needed more. Needed the actual destination of those transfers. Needed to follow the money all the way to wherever it ended up. Offshore accounts, shell companies, someone's personal fortune. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen. Happy to watch Lily tonight. She can have dinner with us. Stay safe, dear. Mrs. Chen knew. Somehow, the 72-year-old widow who lived next door and treated Lily like a granddaughter knew that Ethan was heading into dangerous waters. Maybe it was obvious. Maybe his face telegraphed everything. Maybe Mrs. Chen had just seen enough of life to recognize when someone was making a choice between safety and principle. Ethan texted back gratitude and a promise to pick Lily up before bedtime. Then he opened a new browser window and did something he'd never done in his professional life. He accessed the dark web. Not for anything illegal, not for hacking tools or stolen credentials, but for resources. Forums where financial investigators traded techniques. Whistleblower networks. People who'd fought corporate fraud and lived to tell about it. He found a thread about pension theft. Read testimony from other auditors who'd uncovered similar schemes. Most had been crushed, threatened, discredited, driven out of the industry. A few had succeeded, but only with help. Legal protection, media coverage, regulatory allies who could withstand pressure. Ethan didn't have any of that. He had himself, a laptop, and 3 weeks of observations. But he also had something the success stories mentioned repeatedly: timing. The window between discovery and elimination was narrow. Once the conspirators knew, you had hours or days to either expose everything or become irrelevant. Ethan had already sent the email, already declared himself. The window was open. He needed to climb through it. A new email notification appeared. From Logan Reed, reply all to Ethan's earlier inquiry. Ethan, happy to discuss the Strategic Growth Initiative. It's a sophisticated investment vehicle that requires specialized knowledge to understand properly. Rather than email, let's discuss in detail at this afternoon's meeting. I'll bring full documentation and our investment advisors can walk you through the structure. Looking forward to clearing up any confusion. Logan smooth, professional, subtly condescending. Confusion instead of concerns, just sophisticated to imply Ethan might not understand. Investment advisors to add authority and witnesses. Logan was good at this, but Ethan had been underestimated his entire career. People saw the modest car, the off-rack suit, the small practice, and assumed limited capability. They didn't see the mind that could hold entire financial structures in working memory, that could spot patterns in thousands of transactions, that had built a reputation on being thorough when everyone else settled for sufficient. He began downloading files, everything he'd accessed in 3 weeks, raw data, analysis notes, preliminary reports. He copied it to 3 USB drives, uploaded encrypted versions to cloud storage, emailed packets to his personal attorney with instructions to open only if Ethan went silent for more than 48 hours. Paranoid? Maybe. But Rebecca's fear in that elevator had been real. The convenient timing of the malfunction had been real. The immediate scheduling of an urgent meeting after his email had been real. These people had stolen millions. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a problem. Ethan checked the time. 3:30 p.m. 15 minutes until he needed to leave for Lily's school. 2 hours until the confrontation. He opened one more file. Employee records. Not financial data, but human data. Names, hire dates, families. Jim for maintenance. James Robert Henderson, age 62, employee since 1989, married with 3 adult children. Sandra from HR. Sandra Kim, age 58, widowed, pension representing her only retirement income. 347 names. 347 lives built on a promise that was being stolen piece by piece. Ethan closed the laptop. Some battles you chose. Some chose you. This one had chosen him the moment he'd noticed the pension fund looked too perfect, the moment he'd asked questions that made powerful people nervous. He could walk away. Probably should walk away. Prioritize Lily's safety and stability over strangers' retirements. Except Lily was watching, learning, building her understanding of how the world worked from every choice he made. And he couldn't teach her that right and wrong were negotiable, that justice was something you pursued only when convenient. Ethan started the car and drove toward Lily's school, hands steady on the wheel, breath measured and controlled. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. But courage? That he could manage. Had to manage. For Jim and Sandra and 345 others. For the father he wanted his daughter to see when she looked at him. For the person he needed to be able to see in the mirror. The elevator trap had been a warning. The 5:30 meeting would be a threat. But Ethan Cole had already decided his response. He was going to find the truth, document it, and expose it, no matter what it cost him. The war had begun. Lily was the last student waiting at pickup, sitting on the bench outside her classroom with her backpack carefully positioned beside her, legs swinging in that way 6-year-olds did when they were content to exist in the moment. She saw Ethan's car, and her face lit up with the kind of uncomplicated joy that made every difficult decision feel worth it. "Daddy!" She climbed into the back seat, already talking before her seatbelt clicked. "We did fractions today and I got all of them right, and Mrs. Patterson said I could be the line leader tomorrow, and Emma brought cupcakes because it's her birthday, and—" She paused, actually looking at him in the rear-view mirror. "Are you okay?" Ethan forced his expression into something approximating normal. "Of course, sweetheart. Just thinking about work." "Boring numbers stuff?" "The most boring." He pulled away from the school, joining the parade of other parents doing the same careful dance of work-life balance that defined modern parenting. "Hey, Mrs. Chen invited you for dinner tonight. Would that be okay? Daddy has a late meeting." Lily's expression shifted through visible calculation. She was smart enough to know that late meetings meant something important, possibly stressful, but she was also 6, and Mrs. Chen made excellent dumplings. "Can I take my art project to show her?" "Absolutely." "Okay then." She went back to narrating her day, a stream of consciousness that required minimal response beyond occasional acknowledgement. Ethan let the words wash over him, anchoring himself in her voice, in the normalcy of parent-child conversation that had nothing to do with pension fraud or corporate conspiracies. He dropped her at Mrs. Chen's apartment 20 minutes later. The elderly woman met them at the door, apron already on, the smell of cooking filling the hallway. "Go wash your hands, sweet girl, Mrs." Chen told Lily, then waited until the child was out of earshot before fixing Ethan with a look that had probably intimidated generations of students back when she'd taught high school English. "You look terrible." "Thank you for watching her." "That's not an answer." Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "Whatever you're doing, be smart about it. That child needs her father." "I know." "Do you?" She softened slightly. "I've seen crusaders before, Ethan, people who choose principle over pragmatism. Sometimes they win. More often they just get hurt." She touched his arm briefly. "There's no shame in walking away from fights you can't win." Ethan thought about 347 employees counting on promises. What do I tell her if I walk away? When she asks what I do, what matters? How should she make choices when things are hard? You tell her you kept her safe. That's what matters. Is it? Ethan didn't mean it as challenge, genuinely questioning. Or do I teach her that safety matters more than what's right? Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment. You're going to do what you're going to do. Just promise me you won't be stupid about it. Don't play hero. Heroes get killed. Smart people who document everything and have backup plans, they survive. I promise to be smart. That'll have to be good enough. She glanced back toward her apartment where Lily's voice could be heard explaining her art project to the cat. She'll be fine here. Take whatever time you need. But Ethan, come back. She's already lost one parent to abandonment. Don't make it two through martyrdom. The words stayed with him during the drive back to Meridian Holdings, during the elevator ride up to his temporary office on the 8th floor, during the hour he spent preparing for the 5:30 meeting. Not martyrdom, documentation, evidence, smart planning. His office was barely an office, a repurposed conference room with a desk, chair, and filing cabinet. The kind of space that said temporary contractor in every detail. But it had a door that locked and a window that didn't open, which apparently passed for security. Ethan spread his materials across the desk. 3 weeks of work, distilled into patterns and questions. He organized it chronologically first, then by theme, then by strength of evidence, building the story the way he'd present it to regulators, to prosecutors, to anyone who'd listen. The pension fund data showed the cleanest picture. Too clean, yes, but without the underlying transaction details, too clean was observation, not proof. He needed the messier layers underneath, needed to show that the perfection was constructed, artificial. The Strategic Growth Initiative was more promising. Quarterly transfers totaling millions, routing through an account with no disclosed investments, no performance reports, no beneficiary documentation. That violated multiple regulations, even if the money was being legitimately invested. And if it wasn't legitimate investment, if it was theft dressed up as asset management, then every transfer was a separate count of fraud. But he still couldn't prove where the money went after entering SGY 2847. That account was a black hole, pulling in pension funds and revealing nothing about what happened next. Logan controlled access. Logan approved transfers. Logan provided the quarterly summaries that the board reviewed. Ethan pulled up the IT access logs again, studying David Kelso's late-night sessions. 3 times last month, always after 11 p.m., always accessing the pension database. No maintenance tickets, no authorized business reason. What had David been doing? Ethan opened a new search, looking for David's other system activity. Email logs, file access, application usage, building a profile of normal behavior so the abnormal would stand out. There. A pattern within the pattern. Every time David accessed the pension database late at night, he also accessed the document management system within 30 minutes. Not unusual for an IT administrator. They managed documents as part of their job. But David was accessing specific folders, not performing system-wide maintenance. Ethan traced the document access. Folders labeled strategic investments, asset management, confidential board materials. All restricted. All requiring CFO approval to access, which David had, apparently, granted by Logan Reed's administrator credentials. So Logan was using David as a proxy. Late-night access that wouldn't show Logan's name directly, but would accomplish whatever needed accomplishing. Clever. An extra layer of deniability. Ethan checked the timestamps more carefully. David's last access was 3 days ago. What had he been doing? Creating documents? Deleting them? Moving files? The system didn't track that level of detail, not in the logs Ethan could access. But if David had been creating or modifying documents, there'd be evidence in file metadata. Creation dates, modification dates, version histories. He navigated to the Strategic Investments folder, entering the credentials Logan had provided weeks ago. The folder opened, showing a dozen subfolders organized by quarter and year. Ethan opened the most recent quarter. 15 documents, investment prospectuses, performance reports, asset allocations, everything you'd expect from a legitimate investment fund, everything the board would need to see to approve quarterly transfers. Ethan checked the file metadata. Created dates ranged across the past 3 years. Modification dates were more interesting. Several files showed recent updates within the past week. By David Kelso's system account. Why would an IT administrator be modifying investment documents? Unless they weren't really investment documents. Unless they were constructions, fabrications, evidence manufactured to justify theft. Ethan's heart rate elevated despite his breathing exercises. This was it. This was the proof he needed. David had been maintaining false documentation, updating fake investment reports to keep the illusion alive. Logan couldn't do it himself, too obvious, too traceable. But having IT make routine updates to board materials, that could be explained away if anyone noticed. Except Ethan had noticed. He began downloading the documents, comparing versions where possible, looking for inconsistencies. The investment prospectuses referenced financial instruments, bonds, equities, alternative assets. Ethan cross-referenced the named instruments against public databases. Some existed, many didn't. The bonds were legitimate securities, but the quantities claimed in the Strategic Growth Initiative portfolio exceeded total issuance. They claimed to own more of certain bonds than had actually been created. Simple impossibility, easy to miss if you weren't checking, devastating if you were. The equity positions referenced private companies. Ethan searched business registries, SEC filings, state and corporation records. Half the companies didn't exist. The other half existed but were completely unrelated to Meridian Holdings. Random small businesses that had no idea their names were being used to justify pension fund transfers. It was beautiful in its brazenness. Logan had created an entirely fictional investment portfolio, populated it with real-sounding but fake or impossible holdings, and presented it quarterly to a board that trusted him to do his job properly. Why would they verify? He was the CFO. Verification was his responsibility. Except now Ethan had verified, and it was all lies. He checked his watch. 4:47 p.m., 43 minutes until the meeting. Enough time to document what he'd found, create another backup, send insurance packages to his attorney. His phone rang. Unknown number again. Ethan stared at it, then answered, "Mr. Cole." A man's voice this time, smooth and confident. Logan Reed. "I wanted to reach out personally before our meeting. I think there may be some misunderstandings about the Strategic Growth Initiative." "I don't think there are misunderstandings," Ethan said carefully. "I think there are questions that need clear answers." Of course. And you'll get them. But I wanted to give you some context first, off the record." Logan's tone was friendly, collegial, two professionals discussing technical matters. The SGI is a sophisticated structure. It involves investment vehicles that don't show up in standard databases because they're private placements, invitation-only funds. Very common in corporate treasury management. Private placements should still have documentation, prospectuses, performance reports, beneficiary disclosure. They do. I'm bringing all of it to the meeting. But Ethan, I need you to understand something. Logan's voice shifted, still friendly, but with an edge underneath. These investments are sensitive. Disclosure could impact our negotiating position with partners, could trigger contractual issues. So while I'm happy to show you everything, I need your commitment that this information stays confidential. Attorney-client privilege level, confidentiality. I'm not an attorney, and I'm conducting an independent audit. Confidentiality doesn't work that way. No, but discretion does. A pause. You have a reputation for being reasonable, Ethan. Thorough, yes. Honest, absolutely. But also reasonable. Someone who understands that businesses are complex, that not everything fits into neat regulatory boxes, that sometimes the spirit of compliance matters more than the letter. This was the pivot. The moment Logan shifted from explaining to persuading. I appreciate that, Ethan said neutrally. Good, because here's the thing. The board is very happy with your work so far. Very impressed with your thoroughness and professionalism. So impressed that we're considering offering you a longer-term relationship. Retained auditor position, quarterly reviews, significantly better compensation than your current contract. There it was. The offer Rebecca had predicted. That's generous, Ethan said. You'd be perfect for it. We need someone we can trust, someone who understands our business, Someone who can help us navigate regulatory complexity without creating unnecessary complications. Logan's voice warmed with enthusiasm. Think about it. Steady income, prestigious client, work that actually matters. And you'd still maintain independence, still be an outside auditor, just with a longer-term perspective. Longer-term perspective, Ethan repeated. Exactly. Someone who sees the big picture, who understands that the pension fund is secure, and it is secure, Ethan, I guarantee you, even if the documentation is more complex than standard practice. Someone who can help us improve our processes without creating alarm where none is warranted. Ethan let the silence stretch. Logan was good at this, he had to admit. The offer sounded reasonable, even appealing. Steady income would change everything for Lily, for their life. No more scrambling for clients, no more uncertain months, no more choosing between her needs and his principles. All he had to do was see things Logan's way. Accept the smooth explanations. Trust the CFO to handle the complex stuff. Be reasonable. Can I think about it? Ethan asked. Of course. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Take your time, review the documentation at the meeting, see for yourself that everything is proper, and then we can discuss the longer-term arrangement. Logan sounded genuinely pleased. I think this could be the start of a very productive relationship. 5:30, conference room C. I'll see you there. And Ethan, thank you for being reasonable about this. It's refreshing to work with someone who operates in good faith. The line went dead. Ethan sat motionless, phone still at his ear, processing. Logan thought he'd won, thought the combination of explanation plus opportunity would neutralize the threat. And for most auditors, it probably would. The offer was good. The logic was sound. Why destroy a lucrative relationship over concerns that might be explained away? But Logan had made a mistake. He'd shown his hand too early. If the strategic growth initiative was truly legitimate, if the investments were real, Logan wouldn't need to offer incentives for discretion. He'd just provide the documentation and let it speak for itself. The offer was a confession. Logan knew the documents wouldn't survive scrutiny, knew that anyone who looked closely would find the impossible bond positions and non-existent companies. So he was trying to ensure Ethan wouldn't look closely, wouldn't verify, wouldn't question. Ethan returned to his laptop and began typing a detailed summary of Logan's phone call. Time, date, content, implications. Another document for the insurance package. Then he opened the Strategic Growth Initiative files again and began methodical verification. Each claimed investment cross-referenced against external databases. Each company checked against incorporation records. Each bond position verified against total issuance. By 5:15 p.m., he had documentation proving that at least 60% of the claimed investments were impossible or fictional. The other 40% he couldn't verify one way or the other with public data, but the pattern was clear. The Strategic Growth Initiative was a shell. Money went in, nothing came out. $7 million over 3 years vanished into fictional investments that generated fictional returns on paper while the actual cash went somewhere else entirely. Where? That was still the question. Offshore accounts? Shell companies? Direct personal enrichment? Ethan needed to follow the actual money movement, not just the paper trail Logan had created. But that would require deeper access than he had. Banking records, wire transfer logs, international account information, the kind of data that required subpoenas and regulatory authority, the kind of data Ethan couldn't get alone. He pulled out his phone and composed a careful message to Rebecca Sloan. Meeting with Logan at 5:30. Have documentation proving SGI investments are fictional. Need to discuss next steps. This goes beyond my scope. Her reply came within seconds. Be careful. They're watching. Don't go alone to any isolated locations. Ethan looked around his temporary office. 8th floor, end of hallway, no windows in the corridor, isolated by design. He gathered his materials quickly, stuffing laptop and documents into his briefcase. If they were watching, if this was more than corporate intimidation, staying in a location this vulnerable was stupid. The hallway outside was empty, fluorescent lights humming their usual tone. Ethan walked toward the elevator bank, briefcase heavy in his hand, awareness heightened to every sound and movement. The elevator arrived empty. He stepped in, pressing the button for the 14th floor. Conference room C was there, along with the executive offices. The doors closed and the car began to rise. Ethan watched the floor numbers increment, remembering the afternoon's trap. This elevator had cameras. He could see the small dome in the corner, presumably functional. But cameras could be turned off. Systems could be overridden. If someone wanted him to disappear, there were ways. The elevator dinged arrival at 14. Doors opened smoothly. Ethan stepped into a hallway significantly nicer than the 8th floor. Real artwork on walls, better carpet, the kind of design that said executive territory. Conference room C was halfway down the hall, glass walls allowing visibility of the interior. Ethan could see Logan Reed already there, along with 2 other people he didn't recognize. Not the full board then, a smaller, more controlled audience. He checked his phone. 5:28 p.m. 2 minutes early. Another text from Rebecca. I'm in the building. Call if you need witness. Ethan appreciated the offer but knew it would complicate things. If Rebecca showed up, Logan would frame it as CEO interference in an independent audit. Better to face this alone, record what he could, document everything. He approached the conference room, hand on the door. Inside, Logan stood at the head of the table, looking exactly like Central Casting's vision of a successful CFO. Tailored suit, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that came from years of being the smartest person in financial rooms. The 2 others were a man and woman in their 50s, both dressed professionally, both wearing expressions of polite attention. Logan saw Ethan and smiled, warm and welcoming. Ethan, right on time. Come in, please. Let me introduce you to our external investment advisors. This is Patricia Chen from Apex Capital Management and Richard Doyle from Cornerstone Investments. They manage the Strategic Growth Initiative on our behalf. Ethan shook hands mechanically, mind racing. External advisors, witnesses who'd support Logan's story. Probably paid well for their testimony, possibly complicit in the fraud, definitely positioned to give Logan's lies credibility. Please sit. Logan gestured to a chair. The conference table was covered with documents, thick binders, spreadsheets, glossy presentations. The visual impression of thoroughness and legitimacy. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine. Ethan sat, positioning his briefcase beside his chair, phone in his pocket set to record. Excellent. Well, let's dive right in. Logan opened the top binder, turning it to face Ethan. You had questions about the Strategic Growth Initiative. Perfectly reasonable. It's a complex structure. Patricia and Richard are here to walk you through the investment strategy and show you the underlying documentation. Patricia leaned forward, her expression professionally pleasant. Mr. Cole, the SGI is what we call a multi-strategy fund of funds. Essentially, Meridian's pension assets are pooled with other institutional investors and allocated across various investment vehicles based on risk tolerance and return objectives. It's designed to provide diversification and enhanced returns while maintaining appropriate fiduciary standards. She slid a document across the table. This is the master prospectus. As you'll see, the fund invests in a mixture of fixed income, equity, and alternative assets. The specific holdings rotate based on market conditions and opportunity assessment. Ethan opened the prospectus. It looked professional, glossy pages, detailed charts, performance graphs showing steady returns, the kind of document that would satisfy most oversight. But Ethan had already done his homework. He flipped to the fixed income section, finding the bond listings he'd verified earlier. These bond positions, he said, pointing to a specific line. You claim to hold $17 million in global infrastructure bonds, Series 2022A, but total issuance of that series was $12 million. How do you hold more than exists? The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Patricia's pleasant expression didn't waver. You're looking at aggregate exposure, not direct holdings. We achieve that position through synthetic instruments, derivatives that provide bond-equivalent returns without actually owning the underlying securities. Very common in institutional management. The prospectus doesn't indicate synthetic positions. It lists them as direct holdings. A simplification for reporting purposes, Richard interjected smoothly. The detailed breakdown would be unnecessarily complex for quarterly board review, but I assure you the positions are properly structured and fully collateralized. Ethan turned to the equity section. These private companies you've invested in, I checked in corporation records, half don't exist. The others have no relationship to Meridian or this fund. Logan's smile tightened slightly. Some are offshore entities, different jurisdictions, different registration requirements. Not everything shows up in U.S. databases. Which jurisdictions? That's commercially sensitive information. Logan's tone remained friendly but firm. These are confidential investment opportunities. Disclosing too much detail could compromise our competitive position. I'm conducting a fiduciary audit. Confidentiality doesn't override disclosure requirements. Within reason, Patricia said. But Mr. Cole, you have to understand, these investment vehicles operate in environments where discretion is paramount. Limited partners agreements, non-disclosure provisions, regulatory restrictions in certain jurisdictions. We can't simply hand over complete transparency without violating our obligations to other investors. It was smooth, practiced. Every objection met with technical-sounding explanation. Every question deflected with appeals to complexity or confidentiality. Someone had prepared them well. Ethan pulled out his laptop, opening the files he'd downloaded. The performance reports show consistent returns, 7 to 9% annually, minimal volatility. But these supposed holdings include emerging market positions, alternative assets, private equity, all high volatility investments. How do you achieve such stable returns from volatile positions? Sophisticated hedging strategies, Richard said. We're not passive investors. We actively manage risk through derivatives, options strategies, tactical allocation shifts. The overall portfolio stability reflects our expertise, not the individual position volatility. Can you provide documentation of the hedging strategies? That's proprietary methodology, Patricia said. Our competitive advantage. Surely you understand we can't disclose our entire playbook. Ethan felt the trap closing. Every question had an answer. Every answer sounded plausible. If he didn't know better, if he hadn't already proven the impossibilities, he might be convinced. But he did know better. Where does the money go? Ethan asked directly. The pension fund transfers millions quarterly into the SGI account. That account then distributes to these various investments. Show me the wire transfer records. The actual movement of money from the SGI account to the bond issuers, to the private companies, to the investment vehicles. Silence. Logan exchanged glances with Patricia and Richard, a conversation happening without words. That level of detail isn't typically part of an operational audit, Logan finally said. You're reviewing our internal controls and compliance procedures, not conducting a forensic investigation of external investment managers. I'm reviewing whether the pension fund is being properly managed. Following the money is basic due diligence. Due diligence that exceeds your contracted scope. Logan's voice hardened slightly. Ethan, I appreciate thoroughness, but we're straying into areas that aren't appropriate for your role. Patricia and Richard are registered investment advisors. They're regulated, licensed, subject to their own audits and oversight. Your job is to verify that our internal processes are sound, not to second-guess professional money managers. Unless those money managers are part of a fraud. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Patricia stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be accused. I'm not accusing you, Ethan said calmly. I'm asking for documentation that should exist if the investments are real. Wire transfers, confirmations, custody statements from third-party administrators. Basic evidence that money actually moved where you claim it moved. Logan's facade cracked completely. The friendly CFO disappeared, replaced by something colder. You're out of line, Mr. Cole. Significantly out of line. This audit is terminated, effective immediately. You don't have the authority to terminate. I absolutely do. As CFO, I have discretion over vendor relationships. And right now, I'm exercising that discretion to end a relationship that has become adversarial and counterproductive. Logan began gathering the binders. You'll be paid for your work to date. Your access credentials will be revoked by end of business today. I expect all company materials returned immediately. Ethan didn't move. Terminating an audit because the auditor asks uncomfortable questions is itself evidence of wrongdoing. Terminating an audit because the auditor exceeds his scope and makes baseless accusations is prudent management. Logan's voice was ice now. You've demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of complex financial instruments. Rather than acknowledge your limitations, you've jumped to conspiracy theories. That's not professional behavior. Show me the wire transfers, Logan. Prove me wrong.
I don't have to prove anything to you. You're fired. Richard and Patricia were already at the door, clearly wanting to exit this confrontation. Logan followed them, pausing at the threshold. You have 2 hours to vacate the premises and return all materials, he said. Security will escort you out if necessary. And Ethan, if you spread these baseless accusations outside this building, our legal team will pursue defamation claims aggressively. You'll lose your license, your business, everything. Choose your next steps very carefully. They left. Ethan sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by abandoned binders full of lies. He'd pushed too hard, too fast. Should have been more subtle, more strategic. But subtle didn't work when the opposition controlled all the evidence, all the access, all the institutional power. His phone buzzed. Text from Rebecca. What happened? I saw Logan storm past. Ethan called her. She answered on first ring. I'm fired, he said without preamble. Pushed for wire transfer documentation. Logan shut it down hard. Are you okay? Physically, yes. Professionally, questionable. Ethan stared at the glossy prospectus still on the table. They had investment advisors there, professional-looking people ready to vouch for everything. It's more organized than I thought. How much did you get documented? Enough to prove the investments are fictional, not enough to prove where the money actually went. Ethan heard voices in the hallway, security, probably, coming to enforce his exit. I have 2 hours to leave the building. Don't go back to your office. They might be scrubbing your access already, deleting files you've stored on the network. Already backed up. Multiple copies, offline and cloud. Good. Get out of the building. Go somewhere public. Coffee shop, library, anywhere with cameras and witnesses. Rebecca's voice was tight with tension. Ethan, they're scared. That means you're close, but it also means you're in danger. I know. He stood, grabbing his briefcase. What about you? Logan will know we've been communicating. Let him know.
I'm the CEO. I'm allowed to speak with auditors. A pause. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Tonight. I'm going to force this into the open. They'll shut you down, vote you out. Probably, but they'll have to do it publicly, on record. And that creates documentation, accountability. Right now, everything's hidden. I'm going to make it visible. Ethan walked to the elevator, phone to his ear. If you do this, there's no going back. They'll destroy you. They're already destroying me? This way I go down fighting. Rebecca's voice strengthened with resolve. Besides, I'm not alone. You've got evidence. I've got authority. Together we're harder to silence than either of us alone. The elevator arrived. Empty again. Ethan stepped in. Get that evidence to regulators, Rebecca continued. SEC, Department of Labor, whoever handles pension fraud, make official reports, create records they can't make disappear. That takes time. Forms, procedures. Then also send it to media. Give them the story. Journalists love corporate fraud, especially when it involves stealing from employees. The elevator descended. Ethan watched floor numbers count down, thinking. Media was risky. Premature disclosure could compromise investigations, give targets time to destroy evidence or flee. But Rebecca was right. Sunshine was disinfectant. The more people who knew, the harder to cover up. I'll contact regulators tonight, Ethan decided. Media tomorrow if necessary. Be safe. And Ethan, thank you for not being reasonable, for not taking whatever deal Logan offered, for giving a damn about people you've never met. The elevator opened to the lobby. Security guards were already moving toward him. I have to go, Ethan said. Good luck with the board. You too. He ended the call as security arrived. 2 guards, professional and polite, clearly uncomfortable with their assignment. Mr. Cole? We need to escort you out and collect your building credentials. Of course. Ethan handed over his badge without resistance. I'll need to retrieve some personal items from my office first. I'm sorry, sir. Your office access has been revoked. If you have personal belongings, we can arrange supervised retrieval tomorrow. Supervised. Meaning they'd watch everything he touched, make sure he didn't take any company materials. Ethan had everything important in his briefcase already, but the principal grated. This is really necessary? The guards looked genuinely apologetic. Orders from the CFO. We're just doing our jobs. Ethan nodded, understanding. They walked him to the door, professional and efficient. No drama.
Just a contractor being escorted out after a terminated engagement. Happened all the time in corporate America. Outside, the evening had turned cold. Ethan stood on the sidewalk watching people leave the building at end of business day. Normal people doing normal jobs, unaware that their retirement funds had been stolen, unaware that their CEO was about to wage war with her own board. 347 people. Jim and Sandra and hundreds of others, counting on him now. Ethan pulled out his phone and searched for the nearest SEC field office, then Department of Labor contact information. He'd file reports tonight, formal whistleblower complaints with as much documentation as he could attach. But first he needed to get somewhere safe. Rebecca was right about that. His car, his apartment, both were predictable locations. If Logan was willing to stop an elevator as warning, he might be willing to do worse now that the threat was open. Ethan walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop, the kind of generic chain with decent Wi-Fi and late hours. He ordered something expensive and caffeinated, found a corner table with his back to the wall and a clear view of the entrance, and opened his laptop. The filing process for SEC whistleblower complaints was surprisingly straightforward. Online form, attach supporting documentation, submit. Ethan worked through it methodically, uploading the false investment prospectuses, the impossible bond positions, the non-existent companies, the analysis showing $7 million in transfers with no legitimate destination. He filed under seal, requesting confidentiality. The last thing he needed was his name attached publicly while Logan still had resources to retaliate. Department of Labor was similar. Pension fund fraud fell under ERISA violations. More forms, more documentation, more careful explanation of how employer fiduciary duty had been breached. By 7:30 p.m., he'd filed 4 separate complaints with 3 regulatory agencies. The wheels of justice were now officially turning, however slowly. His phone rang. Mrs. Chen. "Lily's asking when you're coming," she said without preamble. "I told her you're working hard on something important. She wants to know if the numbers are behaving themselves." Ethan smiled despite everything. "Tell her the numbers are being very difficult, but Daddy's handling it." "Are you? Handling it?" "Getting there." Mrs. Chen's skepticism was audible. "Well, she can stay here tonight if needed. I've got the spare room made up, but Ethan, that child needs to see your face. Even if just for a few minutes, reminds her you're real and coming back." "I'll be there by 9, Ethan promised. "Give her hugs for me until then." He ended the call and sat back, exhaustion creeping in now that the immediate crisis had passed. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the confrontation with Logan was fading, leaving fatigue in its wake. But he couldn't rest yet. Regulatory complaints were one thing. Evidence backup was another. Ethan uploaded everything to 3 different cloud services, then copied files to 2 additional USB drives he'd bought from the coffee shop's retail section. One drive went in his wallet. The other he addressed in a padded envelope to his attorney with instructions to place in safe deposit immediately. The coffee shop had a mailbox outside. Ethan dropped the envelope in, hearing it thunk against other mail. One more copy safe, one more backup beyond Logan's reach. His phone buzzed with a news alert. He almost ignored it, then saw the headline. Meridian Holdings CEO calls emergency board meeting amid internal dispute. Rebecca had made good on her threat. Ethan opened the article, scanning quickly. Light on details, corporate communications had clearly worked to minimize information, but confirming that an unscheduled board meeting was happening tonight to address internal governance concerns. The article quoted a brief statement from Logan. "We're confident this matter will be resolved quickly and appropriately. Meridian Holdings remains committed to operational excellence and fiduciary responsibility." So translated, "We're about to crush Rebecca and contain this threat." Ethan checked the time, 8:15 p.m. The meeting was probably happening right now. Rebecca facing down the board, forcing them to choose between her and Logan, making them show their hands publicly. It was brave and possibly suicidal. His phone rang again. Unknown number. Ethan hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Cole, this is Amanda Pierce from the board administration." The same cold professional voice from earlier. "The board has asked me to inform you that they're prepared to reconsider the termination of your audit contract. Ethan sat up straighter. I'm listening. Given the, shall we say, heated nature of this afternoon's meeting, the board feels it would be prudent to allow you to complete your work. They've voted to reinstate your engagement with expanded scope to address any concerns raised. This was a trap. Had to be. They were offering him exactly what he'd wanted, which meant it came with strings attached. What are the terms? Ethan asked carefully. Standard audit completion. Unrestricted access to all financial systems and records. You provide a final report to the board within 2 weeks. Compensation increased by 50% for the additional scope. And Logan Reed? Mr. Reed has been placed on administrative leave pending completion of your audit. He'll cooperate fully with your investigation, but will have no authority to limit or direct your work. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't Logan's decision. This was the board cutting him loose, sacrificing the CFO to protect themselves. They'd seen Rebecca's emergency meeting demand, realized the situation was spiraling, and decided to create the appearance of accountability. Give the auditor access. Let him investigate Logan. Control the narrative by appearing cooperative. Then bury whatever Ethan found in legal complexity and corporate process. I need that in writing, Ethan said. Board resolution, signed by the chairman. Of course. I'll email it within the hour. And I need direct reporting authority to the board, not through Logan or any executive officer. Complete independence. Already stipulated in the resolution. Amanda's tone suggested she was reading from prepared language. The board takes these matters seriously, Mr. Cole. They want the truth, whatever it may be. They wanted control of the investigation, wanted to determine what truth became public. But it also meant access, real access, the kind Ethan needed to follow the money all the way to its destination. I'll need to review the written resolution before confirming, Ethan said. Understood. You'll have it shortly. The board hopes you can resume work tomorrow morning. She hung up. Ethan stared at his phone, thinking. This changed the tactical situation completely. They were offering him the tools to expose the fraud while simultaneously positioning themselves to manage the exposure. The board would claim they'd acted swiftly, brought in independent investigation, held people accountable. Logan would be the fall guy. The institution would survive, unless Ethan could prove the board knew, could show they'd been complicit all along. That would require going deeper, finding evidence not just of the theft, but of the cover-up. Board meeting minutes, email trails, anything showing they'd been informed and chose to ignore it. His phone chimed with an email. Amanda Pierce, subject line, Board resolution, audit reinstatement. Ethan opened the attachment. Official letterhead, board chairman's signature, everything Amanda had promised, plus additional language about cooperation, transparency, and commitment to fiduciary duty. It looked legitimate, probably was legitimate, in the sense that the board had actually voted on it. But the motivation behind it was pure self-preservation. Still, access was access. Ethan replied to the email. Resolution accepted. I'll resume work tomorrow at 8 a.m. I require immediate restoration of all system credentials, plus expansion to include executive email, board materials, and external banking records. The response came within minutes. Approved. IT will have your access restored by 7 a.m. Building security has been notified of your reinstatement. That fast. That easy. They really were desperate to control this. Ethan gathered his materials and left the coffee shop, walking through evening streets toward his car. Tomorrow he'd go back into Meridian Holdings with full access and board authorization. He'd follow every thread, trace every dollar, document every lie. And somewhere in that building, Logan Reed would be watching, knowing his carefully constructed empire was about to collapse. The question was what Logan would do about it, what any of them would do when cornered. Ethan reached his car and sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine yet. Just breathing, processing, planning. He thought about Lily, waiting at Mrs. Chen's, asking if the numbers were behaving. He thought about 347 employees who trusted that their retirements were safe. He thought about Rebecca, probably still in that board meeting, fighting for her professional life. And he thought about tomorrow, walking back into that building, sitting down at his computer and finishing what he'd started. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. But for the first time since the elevator had stopped that afternoon, Ethan felt like he had a fighting chance. He started the car and drove toward Mrs. Chen's apartment, toward his daughter, toward the brief sanctuary of being just dad for a few hours before becoming the auditor who threatened empires again. The numbers would still be there tomorrow. Tonight, he needed to be human. Lily was asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch when Ethan arrived, curled under a knitted blanket with her art project clutched against her chest. The drawing showed two stick figures labeled Me and Daddy standing in front of a building made of numbers. In the sky, she'd drawn a sun with a smiling face and the words, "Numbers are good when Daddy fixes them." Mrs. Chen met him at the door, finger to her lips. She waited as long as she could, kept asking if you were safe. I told her you were helping people, which seemed to satisfy her more than saying you were working. Ethan knelt beside the couch, brushing hair from Lily's face. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. 6 years old and already learning that her father's work sometimes meant worry, meant waiting, meant questions she was too young to fully understand. "I'll carry her to the car," he whispered. "Stay." Mrs. Chen's tone left no room for argument. "Both of you. The spare room is ready. You look like you've been through a war, and whatever's happening tomorrow, you need rest first. Real rest. Not the kind where you stare at the ceiling thinking about all the ways things could go wrong." Ethan wanted to protest, to maintain his independence, to not impose further on this woman who'd already given so much. But exhaustion won. He nodded gratitude. Mrs. Chen showed him to a small bedroom with a double bed and clean sheets. Ethan carried Lily from the couch, tucking her in carefully. She mumbled something about numbers behaving and drifted deeper into sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed watching her breathe. This simple trust she had, that Daddy would come home, would keep her safe, would fix the problems that needed fixing. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. His phone vibrated with a text from Rebecca. "Meeting over, still CEO, barely. Logan suspended. Board wants your report ASAP. Be careful tomorrow." Ethan replied. "Reinstated with full access. Starting at 8 a.m. Her response came immediately. "They're trying to control the investigation. Don't let them." "I won't." He set his phone on the nightstand and lay down beside Lily, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling Mrs. Chen had accurately predicted he'd be staring at. But instead of seeing blank white plaster, he saw patterns, transaction flows, document trails, the architecture of fraud he'd be dismantling tomorrow. Sleep came eventually, fitful and populated with dreams of elevators that fell forever and numbers that refused to add up correctly. Morning arrived with Lily's face inches from his, her expression concerned. "Daddy, you're wearing yesterday's clothes. Did the numbers keep you up all night?" Ethan managed to smile. "Some of them. But I'm okay, sweetheart. Just a busy day yesterday." "Mrs. Chen made pancakes. She said you need fuel for fixing things." Lily paused, then asked with 6-year-old directness, "Are you fixing something important?" "Very important." "Good." She patted his hand with the solemnity of a much older person. "Because you're really good at fixing things. Remember when you fixed my bike, and when you fixed the refrigerator that time? You can fix anything when you try hard enough." If only pension fraud yielded to the same principles as bicycle chains and appliance repairs. But Ethan appreciated the vote of confidence. He showered using supplies Mrs. Chen had somehow procured, borrowed a clean shirt that was 2 sizes too large but better than yesterday's wrinkled version, and joined them for pancakes that tasted like comfort and normalcy. The kind of breakfast that reminded him why any of this mattered. By 7:30 a.m., he'd dropped Lily at school with promises to pick her up on time and instructions to be good for her teachers. She hugged him extra tight before running to join her classmates, and Ethan had to sit in his car for a full minute afterward, centering himself. Then he drove to Meridian Holdings. The building looked the same as always, glass and steel and corporate respectability. But Ethan saw it differently now, the way an X-ray revealed structure beneath skin. Every floor represented employees whose futures had been gambled with. Every window was a potential witness to theft. Every security camera might have recorded something incriminating. His credentials worked. Security waved him through with professional courtesy, no acknowledgement of yesterday's forced exit. Corporate amnesia, pretending the unpleasantness hadn't happened. Ethan rode the elevator to his 8th floor office. hyper-aware of every mechanical sound, every vibration. But the car functioned normally, arriving without incident. His office door was unlocked. Inside, everything appeared untouched. His temporary workspace exactly as he'd left it before the confrontation with Logan. But Ethan knew better than to trust appearances. He examined the desk drawers, the filing cabinet, looking for signs of search or tampering. Nothing obvious. Either they'd been very careful or they hadn't bothered because they'd already copied everything electronically. His computer login worked. Full system access restored, exactly as Amanda Pierce had promised. Ethan began methodically testing permissions, opening databases and folders he'd previously been blocked from. Pension fund records, unrestricted. Strategic Growth Initiative documents, full access. Board meeting minutes, available. Executive email archives, accessible. They'd actually done it, given him everything he'd asked for, which meant either the board was genuinely committed to transparency or they'd already scrubbed anything truly incriminating and were now performing elaborate theater. Ethan's money was on theater, but he'd take the access either way. He started with Logan's email, searching for references to the Strategic Growth Initiative. Thousands of messages spanning 3 years. Ethan filtered by recipient, looking for patterns. Logan communicated regularly with David Kelso, the IT administrator who'd been accessing pension databases at night. They also exchanged frequent messages with Patricia Chen and Richard Doyle, the supposed investment advisors from yesterday's meeting. Most emails were mundane, scheduling, routine updates, professional pleasantries. But Ethan had learned to read between corporate lines, to notice what wasn't said as much as what was. There. A message from 8 months ago, Logan to David. Quarterly update files ready for your review. Use the usual secure channel. Board presentation is Friday. Need everything aligned by Thursday EOD. Usual secure channel, not company email. Something separate, harder to trace. Ethan searched for more references. Found a pattern of Logan asking David to review files through secure channel before every quarterly board meeting. Whatever documents were being prepared, they weren't going through normal company systems. He pulled up David's system access logs, examining the late-night sessions more closely. The timestamps correlated. David would access the pension database and document management system late at night. Then Logan would send these secure channel emails the next morning. They were manufacturing evidence. David would create or modify documents during hours when no one else was watching. Then Logan would review them privately before presenting to the board. Clean, compartmentalized, difficult to prove without access to whatever secure channel they were using. Ethan needed that channel, needed to see the actual communications, the real documents before they were sanitized for board consumption. He opened a new search, looking for any mention of external communication tools, encrypted messaging apps, private email servers, anything that could constitute a secure channel. Logan's official company email was clean, no obvious references to Signal, WhatsApp, Proton Mail, or other privacy-focused services. But people made mistakes. Left breadcrumbs. Ethan expanded his search to David's email. IT administrators often had to support various technologies, which meant they'd have installation records, support tickets, user credentials. There. A support ticket from 2 years ago, David helping Logan set up encrypted communication tool for sensitive board discussions. The ticket referenced an application called SecureCom, enterprise-grade encryption marketed to executives who needed confidential channels. Ethan searched the company's software inventory. SecureCom wasn't listed, which meant it was installed privately, probably on Logan's personal devices rather than company equipment. Smart. Kept the communications off company servers, out of company backups, away from exactly the kind of audit Ethan was conducting. But David had set it up, which meant David might have administrative access, might be able to retrieve message histories. Ethan's phone rang. Internal extension, caller ID showing Rebecca's office. "How's the investigation going?" she asked without preamble. Found evidence of a parallel communication system. Logan and David Kelso were using encrypted messaging for document coordination. I need to access those messages. Can you? Not directly, but David might still have admin credentials. Ethan paused. I need to talk to him, officially, as part of the audit. He called in sick today. Rebecca's tone suggested she found that convenient. First sick day he's taken in 18 months.
Happens to be the day after Logan gets suspended and the investigation expands. Address on file? I can't officially tell you to show up at an employee's home. A pause. But I can accidentally email you the HR directory that happens to contain residential addresses. Accidentally received and noted. The email arrived 30 seconds later. Ethan opened the directory, finding David Kelso's entry. Address in a suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Single, no dependents listed, salary comfortable but not executive level. The kind of person who might cooperate with fraud if properly incentivized or threatened. Also the kind of person who might crack under pressure if approached correctly. Ethan grabbed his briefcase and headed for the parking garage. He was halfway to his car when his phone rang again. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, then decided information was better than ignorance. Mr. Cole. Logan Reed's voice, cold and controlled. I understand you've been granted continued access to company systems. The board reinstated my contract. Yes, they did, despite my strong objections. A pause waited with threat. You should know that I'm cooperating fully with this process. I have nothing to hide. Every transaction, every decision, every document was proper and appropriate. What you're going to discover is that you've misunderstood complex financial structures and jumped to conclusions based on incomplete information. We'll see what the evidence shows. The evidence will show exactly what I'm telling you, and when it does, when you've wasted the board's time and money chasing conspiracy theories, there will be consequences. Professional consequences. Legal consequences. Logan's voice dropped lower. I've built my reputation over 20 years. I won't let some small-time auditor with a hero complex destroy it based on misguided assumptions. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. You're in over your head, Ethan. You don't understand the forces you're playing with. The board gave you access because they think it'll satisfy your crusade and you'll conclude there's nothing wrong. They're right. You'll look, you'll find nothing actionable, and you'll write a report saying everything's fine, because everything is fine. $7 million is missing from the pension fund. $7 million is invested in sophisticated vehicles that generate superior returns. Just because you can't understand the structure doesn't mean it's fraudulent. Logan's tone shifted to something almost pitying. You have a daughter, don't you? Lily, age 6. Think about her future before you destroy yours chasing ghosts. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. Don't bring my daughter into this. I'm not bringing her into anything. I'm reminding you that your choices have consequences. That burned bridges don't rebuild themselves. That professional reputations, once destroyed, rarely recover. Logan paused for effect. Finish your audit. Find nothing wrong. Move on with your life. That's the smart play. The line went dead. Ethan stood in the parking garage, processing. Logan had just made 2 mistakes. First, mentioning Lily specifically, veiled threat or not, that revealed how closely they'd been watching him, investigating his life, looking for pressure points. Second, the call itself. If Logan truly had nothing to hide, he wouldn't be reaching out to intimidate the auditor. He'd let the evidence speak for itself. But Logan was scared. And scared people made mistakes. Ethan got in his car and drove toward David Kelso's address, mind cataloging everything he'd need to say, every approach that might work. David was the weak link, the technical facilitator who'd helped build the infrastructure of fraud but wasn't personally profiting at Logan's level, the kind of accomplice who might choose cooperation over loyalty if presented with the right incentives or the right threats. The neighborhood was modest, small houses with neat yards, the kind of middle-class stability that defined suburban America. David's house was a ranch style with blue siding and a detached garage. His car sat in the driveway, confirming he was home despite calling in sick. Ethan parked on the street and approached the front door. Rang the doorbell. Heard movement inside, then silence. Someone looking through the peephole, deciding whether to answer. The door opened 6 inches, security chain still attached. David Kelso looked exactly like his employee photo, mid-30s, slightly overweight, receding hairline, the exhausted expression of someone who worked too many late nights for too little recognition. Right now, he also looked terrified. Mr. Cole? David's voice was resigned. I can't talk to you. You're part of an active audit. You don't have a choice.
I'm on medical leave. Doctor's orders. Stress-related illness. The words came out rehearsed. I'm not required to participate in company business while on medical leave. Did Logan tell you to say that? David's expression confirmed the answer. He called you last night, Ethan continued. Told you to disappear for a few days. Probably promised it would all blow over, that I'd run my investigation and find nothing, and then everything would return to normal. You need to leave. David started closing the door. Ethan put his hand against it, not forcing but stopping. David, I already know about SecureCom. I know you were accessing the pension database late at night. I know you were creating and modifying documents that Logan presented to the board. What I don't know yet is whether you're a conspirator or a victim. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And here's the thing. Right now, you're the person who can choose how this ends. You can protect Logan and go down with him when the evidence comes out, because it will come out. The regulators are already involved. The SEC, Department of Labor, probably FBI. Once they realize the scale of this. Ethan kept his voice calm, reasonable, the tone of someone offering a lifeline rather than a threat. Or you can cooperate now. Provide the SecureCom message histories. Show what Logan actually ordered you to do. Demonstrate you were following directives rather than initiating fraud. That's the difference between being an accomplice and being a witness. David's face had gone pale. If I talk to you, he'll destroy me. If you don't talk to me, federal prosecutors will destroy both of you. Ethan softened his voice. David, you're what, 36? Whole career ahead of you. Maybe you made some mistakes, followed orders you shouldn't have, looked the other way when you should have questioned. But you can still fix this. You can still be the person who helped expose the fraud rather than the person who enabled it. I have a non-disclosure agreement, legal obligations. That don't apply to illegal activity. You can't contract away your duty to report crimes. Any NDA that prevents you from cooperating with regulators is void. Ethan pulled out a business card, sliding it through the gap in the door. Think about it. Call me. I can help you navigate this, connect you with attorneys who specialize in whistleblower protection. But David, he waited until the IT administrator met his eyes. If federal agents show up instead of me, if you wait until you're subpoenaed and facing charges, the opportunity to cooperate voluntarily disappears. Then you're just another defendant looking for a plea deal. He stepped back from the door, giving David space. I'll be at the office all day. You know how to reach me. Ethan walked back to his car without looking back. He'd planted the seed. Now he needed to give it time to grow while continuing to build the case from other angles. Back at Meridian Holdings, he went straight to the 14th floor. Rebecca's office was larger than Ethan expected, corner position with windows overlooking the city, tasteful furniture, walls decorated with company milestones and community awards. The office of someone who'd built something, not just managed it. Rebecca looked up from her computer, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept about as well as Ethan had. Any luck with David? Scared but thinking about it, I gave him the whistleblower pitch. Ethan sat across from her desk. Tell me about the board meeting last night. Who's with us and who's against us? Rebecca leaned back in her chair, the CEO mask slipping slightly to show the exhaustion underneath. 7 board members total. 3 are Logan's people. They've been having private dinners with him for months, probably coordinating this whole thing. 2 are genuinely independent, brought in for governance credibility, and they seem genuinely shocked by the allegations. The remaining 2 are opportunists. They'll side with whoever comes out on top. So at best, you have 2 solid votes plus yourself. At best, but here's the interesting part. The independents demanded an immediate forensic audit by a Big 4 firm. They wanted to bring in Deloitte or KPMG, someone with institutional weight. And? Logan's faction blocked it, said it was premature, that we should let your investigation complete first, that bringing in external auditors would signal panic to investors and employees. Rebecca smiled grimly. They talked themselves into a corner, argued that your audit was sufficient, that we should trust the process, that transparency meant letting the investigation run its course. Ethan saw the trap, which means when I deliver findings showing fraud, they can't claim the investigation was inadequate. They endorsed it. Exactly. They thought they'd neutered you by giving you access while Logan's lawyers scrub everything. They think you'll find cosmetic issues at worst, write a report with minor recommendations, and the whole thing goes away. Rebecca's expression hardened. I need you to prove them wrong. Working on it. But Rebecca, if the board's that divided, how are you still CEO? Logan's faction should have enough votes to force you out. They tried, proposed a motion for my voluntary resignation, but the independents refused to support it without cause, and the opportunists decided I was less risky than Logan right now. She pulled up an email on her screen, turning it to show Ethan. Then this arrived at 6 a.m. from our corporate counsel. Ethan read the message. Legal warning about fiduciary duty, potential shareholder lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny if the board took action that could be construed as covering up fraud. The lawyer was carefully neutral in language but clear in implication. Firing the CEO who was trying to expose problems would look terrible in court. So you're protected by everyone's fear of liability, Ethan observed. For now. But the moment you deliver a report saying everything's fine, or the moment they think they can blame this on me somehow, I'm gone. Rebecca closed the email. I've got a week, maybe 2. Then they'll find a reason. Then we make sure I deliver the right report in less than a week. Ethan spent the rest of the morning deep in financial records, tracing transaction flows with the kind of methodical attention that had defined his career. Every transfer from the pension fund to the strategic growth initiative, every supposed investment distribution, every quarterly return calculation. He built spreadsheets that tracked money movement across time, highlighted inconsistencies, demonstrated mathematical impossibilities. The bond positions remained the clearest evidence. Logan claimed $17 million in holdings from an issuance of only $12 million. Ethan documented not just the impossibility, but the deliberate nature of it. The prospectus had been updated 3 times in the past year, each time increasing the claimed position, even though the underlying bonds hadn't changed. Someone was inflating the numbers progressively, probably to justify larger transfers from the pension fund. More fake investments meant more money could be reallocated into the strategic growth initiative black hole. Around noon, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is David. Can we meet? Not at office. Somewhere private? Ethan replied, Coffee shop on 5th and Main. 1 hour. He arrived early, choosing a table near the back with visibility to the entrance. David showed up 10 minutes late, looking like he'd aged years overnight. He ordered nothing, just slid into the chair across from Ethan with the posture of someone heading to an execution. I need immunity, David said without preamble. Full protection from prosecution. That's the only way I talk. I can't grant immunity. I'm an auditor, not a prosecutor. Ethan kept his voice low, aware of other patrons nearby. But I can connect you with people who can arrange it. Federal prosecutors offer immunity to witnesses who provide substantial cooperation. You'd need a lawyer I have a lawyer. He says I'm screwed either way. Either I cooperate and Logan destroys my career, or I stay quiet and federal charges destroy my life. David's hands shook slightly. How did this happen? I was just doing my job, following orders, making systems work. What systems specifically? David glanced around, paranoid. I can't talk details without immunity. Then talk generalities. Help me understand the structure so I can build the case that gets you immunity. A long silence while David wrestled with the decision. Finally, he leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. Logan needed documents that looked legitimate, board presentations, investment reports, performance summaries, but the real data didn't support his narrative, so he needed alternatives. Fabricated documents. He called it modeling different scenarios, said we were projecting potential outcomes, showing the board what success would look like. I built templates. He provided the numbers. I made it look professional. David's voice was hollow. I thought it was strategic planning, future projections, not lying about what had already happened. When did you realize it wasn't projections? 6 months ago, maybe. I don't know exactly. There was a discrepancy in one of the reports, a date field that didn't make sense if it was forward-looking. I asked Logan about it. He said it was a typo, had me fix it, and then David stopped. Then what? Then he offered me a bonus, significant bonus. framed it as appreciation for my flexibility and discretion, but I knew what it really was. David looked directly at Ethan for the first time. Hush money. Payment for not asking questions. Did you take it? Yes. The admission seemed to cost him. $15,000. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Logan was legitimate, that I'd earned the bonus through hard work. But I knew. Some part of me knew. Ethan pulled out his laptop, opening a secure note document. I need specifics. Dates, document names, the secure comm message history. Not without immunity. David. Ethan's tone sharpened. You came to me. You asked for this meeting. That means some part of you wants to do the right thing, wants to stop being complicit. So help me help you. Give me enough to build the case, and I will personally walk you to federal prosecutors and advocate for full immunity. But I can't do that with vague admissions. I need evidence. David pulled out his phone, hands still shaking. I backed up the secure comm server. Didn't delete it when Logan told me to last night. Kept a copy because... He trailed off. Because you knew this was coming. I have 3 years of messages. Every instruction Logan gave me. Every document he reviewed. Every time he told me to modify something to align with board expectations. David's voice strengthened slightly. He was careful. Never explicitly said create fake documents. Always phrased it as refinements, adjustments, optimizations. But the pattern is clear. Send me the backup. Not until I have immunity in writing. They'd reached an impasse. David had the smoking gun but wouldn't hand it over without protection. Ethan needed the evidence to get prosecutors interested in granting that protection. Classic catch-22. Okay, Ethan said. Different approach. You give me one message. Single example that demonstrates the pattern but doesn't expose the full scope. I take that to prosecutors as proof you have valuable information worth protecting. They start immunity negotiations. Once immunity is secured, you provide everything. David considered this. One message. Your choice, which one? David scrolled through his phone, searching, found something. Turned the screen to show Ethan. The message was from Logan to David, dated 14 months ago. Quarterly board package needs adjustment. SGI performance showing 7.2% return, but target was 8.5%. Update the charts to reflect target achievement. Board expects consistency with projections. Simple, clear, undeniable instruction to falsify performance data. Screenshot this and send it to my email, Ethan said. I'll have it to prosecutors by end of day. David did, hands steadier now that he'd made the decision. What happens next? I finished building the case. You talk to your lawyer about formal cooperation. Within 48 hours, we'll have you in front of federal prosecutors with immunity on the table. Ethan closed his laptop. But David, once you start this, you can't stop halfway. They'll want everything, full testimony, willingness to testify in court if it comes to that. You'll be the key witness against Logan and possibly others. I know. David stood, looking simultaneously terrified and relieved. He called me this morning. Logan said everything would be fine, that you'd find nothing, that I should just stay quiet and trust him. But I couldn't, because I kept thinking about those pension accounts, about real people, and I realized I couldn't live with being the reason their retirements disappeared. After David left, Ethan sat for a few minutes processing. He had the thread. One message proving Logan ordered document falsification. With David's cooperation, he'd have 3 years of similar instructions, a complete record of the fraud's mechanics. But he still didn't know where the money went. That was the final piece. The $7 million had to be somewhere. Someone was benefiting. And until he could prove who and how, the case remained incomplete. Back at the office, Ethan attacked the problem from a different angle. Forget following the money through Meridian's systems. Logan had designed those trails to dead end. Instead, look for external connections. Payments going out of the company to vendors, contractors, any entities that might be shells or fronts. He pulled up accounts payable records, filtering for payments exceeding $50,000. Hundreds of transactions, normal business operations, office supplies, IT services, facility maintenance, professional services. All legitimate on surface examination. But Ethan had learned to spot patterns. He sorted by frequency and consistency. Most vendors had irregular payment schedules. Bills came as services were provided, amounts varied based on usage. But 3 vendors showed clockwork regularity. Same amount, same day, every quarter for 3 years straight. Riverside Consulting Services. Quarterly payments of $400,000. Summit Advisory Group. Quarterly payments of $600,000. North Point Management, LLC. Quarterly payments of $350,000. Combined, over $5 million annually. Flowing to 3 companies Ethan had never seen referenced in any budget documents, any board materials, any operational planning. He searched for contracts with these vendors, found boilerplate consulting agreements signed by Logan Reed, describing services as strategic advisory and specialized expertise in language so vague it meant nothing. He searched business registries for the companies themselves. All 3 were registered in Delaware. Common for legitimate businesses, but also common for shells. All 3 listed the same registered agent, a service that specialized in corporate anonymity. No disclosed officers, no public ownership information, no websites, no apparent business operations beyond receiving quarterly payments from Meridian Holdings. Ethan's heart rate accelerated. This was it. The destination for the stolen pension funds. Logan was routing money through the fictional Strategic Growth Initiative, then paying it out to these shell companies under the guise of consulting fees. From there, it could be distributed anywhere: offshore accounts, personal enrichment, payoffs to co-conspirators. He needed to crack the shells open, find out who actually controlled Riverside, Summit, and North Point. That would show him who was profiting from the fraud. Corporate ownership records in Delaware were deliberately opaque, but money always left trails. Bank accounts, tax filings, regulatory disclosures. Ethan began searching, pulling together fragments from different databases. There. Summit Advisory Group had filed a single-page tax document 2 years ago, listed under a different registration number. The filing showed 1 employee, Patricia Chen. The same Patricia Chen who'd sat in that conference room yesterday claiming to be an independent investment advisor. She wasn't an advisor. She was part of the laundering operation. Ethan kept digging. Found a property record showing Richard Doyle, the other supposed advisor, as officer of North Point Management, LLC. 2 of the 3 shells controlled by the very people Logan had brought in to validate the fraud. That left Riverside Consulting Services. No obvious connection to anyone Ethan recognized. He expanded his search, looking for any intersection between Riverside and Meridian Holdings beyond the payment record. His phone rang. Rebecca. "The board is calling an emergency session tomorrow morning," she said, tension evident. "They want your preliminary findings, whatever you have, even if incomplete." "Tomorrow's too soon." "It's not a request. Logan's faction is pushing hard. They claim the suspended CFO deserves swift resolution, that leaving him in limbo is unfair. The independents agreed to a preliminary review." Rebecca paused. "Ethan, if you don't have something solid, they're going to reinstate Logan and fire me. This is the moment." "I have plenty solid. Document falsification, shell companies, pension fund theft. I can prove all of it." "Can you prove who benefited?" "Because Logan's already building his defense. Claims he was following board directives, that the consulting contracts were approved through proper channels, that any irregularities were system errors rather than intentional fraud." Ethan closed his eyes, thinking. "I can prove Patricia Chen and Richard Doyle controlled 2 of the shells. That's conspiracy to defraud." "It's a start, but the board will want the full picture. They'll want to know how deep this goes, who else was involved, whether any of them are implicated." Rebecca's voice dropped. "Ethan, some of those board members might be part of this. If you can't prove it, they'll use tomorrow's meeting to bury everything." "Then I need tonight to finish." Ethan checked his watch, 3 p.m. "I'll work through the night if necessary. By tomorrow morning, I'll have the complete picture." After hanging up, Ethan returned to his search for Riverside Consulting's ownership. He tried different approaches, different databases, looking for any connection that would reveal who controlled the company. Hours passed. Evening turned to night. The office emptied around him as employees headed home, leaving Ethan alone with his laptop in the fluorescent hum of after-hours workspace. At 11 p.m., he found it. a Delaware corporate filing from 4 years ago, before the name changed to Riverside Consulting. The company had originally been registered as Reed Strategic Services, owned by Logan Reed. Logan hadn't just facilitated the fraud, he'd directly profited from it, created his own shell company, disguised it with a generic name, and paid himself consulting fees using stolen pension money. Over 3 years, Riverside had received more than $4 million, money that came from employees like Jim and Sandra, filtered through fictional investments, and ended up in Logan's pocket. Ethan sat back, the full picture finally clear.
Logan had built a nearly perfect scheme: steal from the pension fund incrementally, route it through a fake investment initiative that he controlled as CFO, distribute the money to shell companies he and his co-conspirators owned, all while creating meticulously false documentation that made everything appear legitimate to cursory review. The only way to catch it was to follow every thread, verify every claim, look beneath every layer of professional polish, which is exactly what Ethan had done. He began compiling the final report: chronological narrative of the fraud, documentary evidence for each element, financial analysis showing money flow from pension fund through SGY to shells, corporate ownership records connecting shells to Logan, Patricia, and Richard. David Kelso's message proving intentional falsification, the impossible bond positions, the non-existent companies, everything organized, indexed, irrefutable.
By 4 a.m., he had 60 pages of single-spaced findings with 200 pages of supporting exhibits, proof that would survive legal challenge, regulatory review, criminal prosecution. Ethan attached it to an email addressed to Rebecca with copies to the 2 independent board members. Subject line: Preliminary Audit Findings. Strategic Growth Initiative and Related Matters. His finger hovered over send. Once he pressed it, there was no recall. The board would have everything: Logan's crimes exposed, the co-conspirators identified, the full scope of the theft documented, and whoever on the board had been protecting Logan would know their position was untenable. Ethan pressed send. The email went out into the early morning darkness, carrying with it the truth that would destroy careers, trigger investigations, possibly lead to criminal charges. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up. He'd done it, built the case, exposed the fraud, protected those 347 employees. His phone buzzed immediately despite the hour. Rebecca: reading now? This is devastating. Thank you. Another message from one of the independent board members. Emergency meeting moved to 7 a.m. All members required. Bring all supporting materials. 4 hours from now. Barely enough time to go home, shower, check on Lily, and return. Ethan gathered his materials, backing up everything one more time to multiple locations. He walked through the empty office toward the elevator, briefcase heavy with the weight of evidence and consequence. The elevator doors opened. Empty car. Ethan stepped in, watching the doors close, feeling the descent begin. This time, when it reached the lobby, when the doors opened onto the quiet pre-dawn building, Ethan walked out knowing he'd completed what he'd started. The war wasn't over. Tomorrow's meeting would be battle, and Logan would fight back with everything he had. But the truth was documented now. Irrevocable. Real. Outside, the city was still dark, dawn an hour away. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, breathing cold air, watching the first hints of light touch the horizon. In a few hours, he'd face that boardroom, present his findings, watch as people who'd enabled fraud tried to distance themselves from consequences. Some would deny, some would deflect, some might even attack. But Ethan had the numbers, had the evidence, had the truth. And truth, he'd learned, was the only thing that mattered when everything else fell away. He walked to his car, drove toward home, toward a few hours of rest before the final confrontation. The numbers had finally behaved. Now he just had to make sure people did too. The house was dark when Ethan arrived, Mrs. Chen having kept Lily overnight again without being asked. He found a note on his kitchen counter in her precise handwriting. Child is safe. You look like death. Sleep 2 hours minimum or I'm calling protective services. MC. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. He set his alarm for 6 a.m., giving himself 90 minutes, and collapsed onto his bed fully clothed. Sleep came instantly, dreamless and absolute. the kind of shutdown that happened when a body simply stopped negotiating with consciousness. The alarm felt like violence. Ethan silenced it, stumbled to the shower, and stood under water as hot as he could tolerate, letting it burn away the fog. His reflection in the mirror looked haunted. Dark circles, 2 days of stubble, the kind of exhaustion that lived in bones rather than muscles. But his eyes were clear, focused. He'd done harder things than face a hostile boardroom. He'd rebuilt his entire life after Sarah left. He'd learned to braid hair and pack lunches and explain why sometimes mommies chose not to come back. Corporate warfare was nothing compared to being the only parent standing between a 6-year-old and a world that didn't care about her tears. He dressed in his best suit, the one reserved for court testimony and regulatory hearings. Put on cufflinks Lily had given him for his birthday, plastic things shaped like calculators that cost $3 but meant everything. Checked his briefcase 3 times, laptop, printed report, USB backup drives, David Kelso's screenshot, corporate ownership records. Everything he needed to prove everything he'd found. By 6:30 a.m., he was back at Meridian Holdings, the building just coming to life with early arrivals and cleaning crews finishing night shifts. Security recognized him now, waving him through without checking credentials. The auditor who wouldn't quit. The contractor who'd somehow become the center of a corporate crisis. The 14th floor was already active. Rebecca stood outside the boardroom, tablet in hand, looking like she'd slept even less than Ethan. She saw him and walked over, voice low. They've been here since 5 a.m. Logan's faction, the corporate attorneys, preparing their defense. I've heard shouting through the walls. She glanced toward the closed boardroom doors. They know what's in your report. They're going to fight every word. Let them fight. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence they'll claim is misinterpreted. They're bringing their own financial experts, people who'll testify that complex investment structures naturally look suspicious to unsophisticated review. Rebecca's expression was grim. Ethan, they're going to make this about you, your qualifications, your experience, your motivations. They'll paint you as a crusader manufacturing scandal to justify your fees. My fees are $25,000 for a month's work. Logan stole $7 million. Math doesn't care about narrative. Boardrooms do. She touched his arm briefly. Just be prepared. This won't be a rational discussion of facts. It'll be theater, performance. They'll try to make you emotional, make you defensive, make you look unreliable. I've testified in federal court. I can handle a boardroom. The doors opened. A woman Ethan didn't recognize gestured them inside. The board is ready. The conference room had been transformed. 7 chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a single seat positioned like a witness stand. A court reporter sat in the corner with a stenography machine. 2 men in expensive suits flanked a presentation screen, the financial experts Rebecca had warned about. And in the back row, arms crossed and expression carved from ice, sat Logan Reed. He looked different than the smooth CFO from earlier encounters. Harder, cornered. The polish had burned away, leaving something raw underneath. His eyes tracked Ethan with the focus of a predator watching prey, calculating angles of attack. The board chairman, a silver-haired man named Harold Chen, who'd made his fortune in manufacturing before retiring to board positions, sat center in the semicircle. He gestured to the lone chair. Mr. Cole, thank you for joining us on short notice. Please, sit. Ethan sat, positioning his briefcase beside the chair, very aware of the power dynamic. 7 people elevated, looking down. 1 person isolated, looking up. Interrogation positioning, whether intentional or not. I understand you've prepared preliminary findings regarding our financial controls and the Strategic Growth Initiative, Harold continued, his voice professionally neutral. Before we review those findings, I want to establish some parameters. This is an informal board session, not a legal proceeding, but we are creating a record. He nodded toward the court reporter. Everything said here is confidential and subject to attorney-client privilege as it relates to board governance. Do you understand? I understand you're creating a record, Ethan said carefully. But I should clarify. My findings have already been filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Labor, and the FBI. This board doesn't have privilege over information that's part of active regulatory investigations. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Several board members exchanged glances. Logan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. He'd known Ethan had filed complaints, but perhaps not the full scope. Harold's professional neutrality cracked slightly. You filed federal complaints without consulting this board? I filed whistleblower reports as required by law when I discovered evidence of pension fraud. The board isn't entitled to veto mandatory reporting. One of Logan's allies, a woman named Patricia Morrison, who ran a private equity firm, leaned forward. That's incredibly presumptuous, Mr. Cole. You've unilaterally decided that normal business operations constitute fraud and involved federal authorities in what amounts to a billing dispute. $7 million stolen from employee pensions isn't a billing dispute. Allegedly stolen, one of the financial experts interjected. He was younger than Ethan expected, probably mid-40s, with the polished confidence of someone whose expertise was rarely questioned. I'm Dr. James Foster, PhD in financial economics, former SEC examiner, currently with Whitman Strategic Advisory. I've reviewed your report, and frankly, it demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of sophisticated investment vehicles. Then help me understand, Ethan said evenly. Explain how the Strategic Growth Initiative holds $17 million in bonds from an issuance of only $12 million. Synthetic positions, derivatives, total return swaps that provide economic exposure without direct ownership. Foster spoke with the patience of a professor addressing a slow student. Institutional investors use these instruments constantly. The prospectus language was simplified for board presentation, but the underlying structure is perfectly legitimate. Show me the swap agreements. They're proprietary and confidential. Convenient. Ethan opened his laptop, pulling up documentation. I've reviewed public derivatives databases. No registered swaps provide exposure to Global Infrastructure Bond Series 2022A in the quantities claimed. The counterparties don't exist. The transactions aren't recorded anywhere except in documents created by David Kelso at Logan Reed's direction. Foster's expression tightened. Not all derivatives are publicly registered. Private agreements between institutional parties still require counterparty disclosure to the pension fund. ERIS. Regulations mandate transparency about who holds the other side of any derivative position affecting pension assets. But the Strategic Growth Initiative documentation shows no counterparties, no swap agreements, no actual trades. Ethan met Foster's eyes. Because they don't exist, the positions are fiction. That's speculation based on incomplete information, Foster shot back, without access to the complete trade files, which Logan has refused to provide, conveniently claimed they're too sensitive or too complex or require permissions he can't grant. Ethan turned to address the full board. Every time I ask for actual evidence of actual investments, I get excuses, complexity, confidentiality, competitive sensitivity. But real investments leave real trails, wire transfers, custody confirmations, third-party administrator records. I've asked for all of it. Logan has provided none of it. Logan spoke for the first time, voice-controlled but with an edge. Because you lack the security clearance and need to know required to access certain commercial relationships. These investments involve sovereign wealth funds, foreign institutions with strict privacy requirements. I can't simply hand over documentation that would violate international agreements and jeopardize ongoing partnerships. Then explain Riverside Consulting Services, Ethan said, pivoting. The shell company you created 4 years ago, later renamed to hide your ownership, which has received over $4 million in pension money disguised as consulting fees. The room went silent. Logan's expression didn't change, but two of his board allies shifted uncomfortably. Riverside provides legitimate strategic advisory services, Logan said, each word carefully placed. The fees are market rate for specialized expertise. My ownership interest was fully disclosed in conflict of interest statements filed with the audit committee. Ethan pulled up records on his screen. I've reviewed 3 years of audit committee minutes. Your ownership of Riverside is never mentioned. The consulting agreements describe services so vague they're meaningless. And the payment amounts precisely match shortfalls in the Strategic Growth Initiative's supposed investment returns. He showed the correlation on screen, quarters where SGI underperformed, Riverside's fees increased proportionally. Perfect inverse relationship. You were paying yourself to cover up the fact that there were no actual investment returns. Harold Chen held up a hand. Let's slow down. Logan, did you disclose your ownership of Riverside Consulting to the audit committee? The disclosure was in my annual conflict statement filed with HR as required by company policy. Logan's voice remained steady. If the audit committee didn't review those statements, that's a process failure, not a concealment on my part. But you knew the audit committee wasn't reviewing them, Rebecca interjected, speaking up from her position against the wall. You chair the audit committee, Logan. You control what gets reviewed. Filing a disclosure you know won't be read isn't transparency, it's theater. I'm not responsible for other committee members' diligence. You're responsible for the committee's function. Rebecca's control finally cracked. You stacked it with your allies, limited what they could review, and buried disclosures in administrative paperwork no one reads. You built a system designed to hide your theft. Patricia Morrison stood abruptly. This is inappropriate. Rebecca, you're allowing personal animosity to cloud your judgment. Logan has served this company with distinction for 8 years. The suggestion that he's some kind of criminal mastermind is insulting and defamatory. It's also documented. Ethan pulled up David Kelso's message on screen. This is from Logan to our IT administrator, instructing him to falsify investment performance data. Direct quote, update the charts to reflect target achievement. He ordered creation of fake returns to justify continuing the fraud. Foster leaned forward, squinting at the screen. That's a single message lacking context. Update the charts could mean correcting errors, incorporating late arriving data, any number of legitimate activities. The context is 3 years of similar messages. David Kelso has provided complete SecureCom archives showing systematic falsification of board materials. Ethan looked directly at Logan. He's cooperating with federal investigators. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. Everything you told him to do, every document you ordered fabricated, every instruction to hide the theft. He's giving them all of it. Logan's facade finally cracked. Genuine shock flashed across his face, followed by calculation, then something darker. David is lying, trying to save himself by manufacturing allegations against me. Whatever he's claiming is backed by 3 years of your own messages, your own words, your own instructions in writing. Ethan felt the momentum shifting. He kept everything, Logan, every communication. You told him to delete the SecureCom server last week, probably when you realized I was getting close. But he backed it up first, kept insurance, and now that insurance is with the FBI. Harold Chen was reading something on his tablet, expression darkening. Logan, I'm looking at preliminary filings from the SEC. They've opened a formal investigation into pension fund management and related party transactions. This isn't theoretical anymore. Federal regulators are actively investigating this company. One of the independent board members, a woman named Janet Solis, who'd built a career in nonprofit governance, spoke up. I move that we immediately suspend all payments to Riverside Summit and North Point, pending independent verification of services rendered. Further, I move that we engage external forensic accountants to conduct a complete audit of the Strategic Growth Initiative and all related transactions. Second, said the other independent, a retired judge named Marcus Webb. We don't need external accountants, Patricia Morrison argued. We have Dr. Foster. We have Logan's documentation. Logan's documentation is what's being investigated, Janet's voice rose. We have an employee cooperating with federal authorities, an auditor with evidence of systematic fraud, and regulatory agencies opening formal investigations. At this point, continuing to defend Logan isn't loyalty, it's liability. Marcus Webb nodded agreement. The board's fiduciary duty is to the company and its stakeholders, not to any individual executive. If there's even a possibility that pension funds have been misappropriated, we're obligated to investigate thoroughly and cooperate with authorities. We're also obligated to not throw loyal employees under the bus based on preliminary allegations, Patricia shot back. Logan deserves due process, the chance to defend himself before we accept some conspiracy theory from a contractor with questionable motives. Questionable motives? Ethan's voice was quiet but cut through the arguing. What exactly do you think my motive is? I was hired to do an audit. I found fraud. I reported it. That's literally my job. Your job was to review controls, not launch a crusade. Patricia's expression was hostile now. You've turned a routine engagement into a federal case because you apparently fancy yourself some kind of corporate detective. Meanwhile,
You've damaged this company's reputation, spooked our investors, and created regulatory scrutiny that could destroy shareholder value.
But shareholder value built on stolen pensions deserves to be destroyed. That's exactly the kind of self-righteous grandstanding I'm talking about. Patricia stood, pointing at Ethan. You've decided you're the hero in some morality play. Reality is more complex. Business is more complex. Sometimes things that look improper to unsophisticated eyes are actually standard practice in sophisticated finance. Then explain the non-existent companies. Ethan pulled up business registry searches. Summit Advisory's supposed investment portfolio includes equity positions in 12 private companies. I've verified incorporation records. 6 of those companies don't exist. 3 more exist but have no connection to Meridian or any investment fund. The remaining 3 are legitimate, but our supposed holdings exceed total outstanding shares. He turned the laptop to face the board. That's not sophisticated finance. That's fiction. Dr. Foster started to respond, but Harold held up a hand. James, please. I'm reading the same registry data Mr. Cole is presenting. These discrepancies are factual, not interpretive. Either the companies exist or they don't. Either we can hold more shares than were issued, or we can't. Basic arithmetic. The registry data might be outdated, Foster tried, for 12 companies simultaneously, all in ways that coincidentally make our portfolio look larger than possible. Harold's voice had shifted from neutral to genuinely angry. I've run manufacturing operations for 40 years. I know what real supply chains look like versus paper inventory. This smells like paper inventory. Logan finally stood, commanding attention through sheer force of presence. When he spoke, his voice was cold and precise. A man who'd decided negotiation was over. Let me be very clear about what's actually happening here. Ethan Cole is a failed auditor from a failed practice who saw an opportunity to manufacture a scandal that would make him relevant. He's taken complex financial structures he doesn't understand, applied simplistic analysis that ignores nuance, and created a narrative of fraud where none exists. Meanwhile, he's violated client confidentiality, exceeded his scope, and filed inflammatory complaints with federal authorities to create pressure and legitimize his baseless accusations. Logan turned to face Ethan directly. You want to know about Riverside? It's a consulting firm that provides specialized strategic analysis this company needs and values. You want to know about the investment portfolio? It's managed by professionals whose expertise far exceeds yours. You want to know about David Kelso? He's a disgruntled employee who made mistakes and is now trying to avoid accountability by inventing stories about innocent directives. And the $7 million? Ethan asked quietly. Is safely invested in growing, exactly as represented. Your inability to understand or verify the structure doesn't make it fraudulent, it makes you incompetent. Logan's voice was ice. This board needs to decide whether they're going to be stampeded by regulatory panic and employee hysteria, or whether they're going to trust the professional judgment of their executive team and legitimate financial experts. The room divided visibly. Patricia Morrison and the other Logan ally nodded agreement. The independents looked skeptical. The opportunists read the room, calculating which position would serve them best. Harold Chen sat back, clearly struggling with the decision. As chairman, his vote would carry significant weight, possibly be decisive. Ethan watched him wrestle with it, the comfort of trusting familiar executives versus the growing pile of evidence suggesting that trust was misplaced. I need to see the wire transfers, Harold finally said. Actual bank records showing money moving from the Strategic Growth Initiative account to the investments claimed. Not prospectuses, not performance reports. Actual transfers that a bank can confirm happened. That would require subpoena authority, Logan said. The accounts are held by third-party investment managers who won't release detailed transaction records without legal compulsion or client authorization. I can request the records, but it will take time. How much time? Weeks. Possibly months. These are foreign institutions, complex jurisdictions. Convenient, Janet Solis's voice dripped skepticism. Every piece of evidence that could exonerate you requires months to produce. Every document that could verify your story is trapped behind privacy laws or complexity. At some point, Logan, the pattern of unavailability becomes evidence itself. I'll authorize a subpoena, Marcus Webb said. Use my legal contacts to fast-track production. If the investments are real, we'll have confirmation within days, not months. Logan's expression flickered, brief panic, quickly controlled. That would damage our commercial relationships. These investment managers value discretion. I value not going to prison as an accessory to pension fraud, Marcus interrupted. The board's exposure here is massive. If federal prosecutors decide we knew or should have known about misappropriation, we're all personally liable. I'm not protecting theoretical commercial relationships at the cost of my actual freedom. Patricia Morrison tried one more defense. We're being railroaded by fear. One contractor makes allegations, suddenly we're treating our CFO like a criminal. This is exactly how witch hunts start. Witch hunts don't typically include documentary evidence, cooperating witnesses, and federal investigations. Janet cut her off. Patricia, I understand you and Logan have a relationship. You've socialized, you've invested together, you consider him a friend. But that can't blind you to what's in front of us. The evidence is substantial. The risks are enormous. We have to act. I move we immediately terminate Logan Reed as CFO and place him on administrative leave pending completion of the forensic audit, Marcus said formally. Second, Janet responded instantly. Harold looked around the table. Discussion? This is premature, Patricia argued. We should wait for the forensic results before taking action against an executive who's served us well for years. We should remove someone with access to company systems and records while those systems and records are under investigation, Marcus countered. Standard practice. Protect the integrity of the evidence. Vote, Harold said quietly. All in favor of immediate termination and administrative leave for Logan Reed. Marcus and Janet raised their hands immediately. Rebecca, from her position as non-voting CEO, watched intently. The two opportunists exchanged glances, then one raised his hand, then the other. Self-preservation trumping loyalty. Harold hesitated for a long moment, then raised his hand. Motion carries 5-2. Patricia Morrison and her ally sat with arms crossed, outvoted and furious. Logan stood motionless, the careful control finally shattering. This is a mistake. You're destroying this company based on the lies of a desperate contractor and a disloyal employee. When the truth comes out, and it will come out, every one of you who voted for this will answer for it. We're voting based on substantial evidence of fraud, Harold said, voice heavy. Logan, I'm sorry. You've been a valued colleague, but the board can't ignore what we've seen today. Please surrender your credentials and company devices to security. You'll be escorted from the building. I'm not some criminal. You're a suspended executive under investigation. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Security had apparently been waiting just outside. Two guards entered, professional and uncomfortable with the assignment. Logan looked at them, at the board, at Ethan. His expression cycled through disbelief to rage to something calculating and dangerous. You think you've won, he said directly to Ethan. You have no idea what you've started. No idea who you're actually fighting. Then he was being escorted out, still protesting, still threatening, voice fading as he moved down the hallway. The board sat in stunned silence after he left, the enormity of what they'd just done settling over them. They'd terminated their CFO, validated fraud allegations, exposed themselves to regulatory scrutiny and shareholder lawsuits and criminal investigation. Harold looked at Ethan, exhaustion and something like respect in his eyes. Your report. The full version. I need it immediately, and I need you to cooperate fully with whatever forensic team we bring in. Already prepared to do both. What's your assessment of the damage? How much money is actually missing? Conservatively, $7 million from the pension fund. Possibly more if the scheme ran longer than I've documented. I can only verify 3 years back. Before that, records show signs of manipulation that makes earlier analysis unreliable. Can we recover it? Ethan chose his words carefully. If Logan and his co-conspirators still have the money, potentially yes. If they've moved it offshore, hidden it in complex trusts, spent it, recovery becomes much harder. Federal authorities will try, but pension fund victims often receive cents on the dollar in fraud cases. Janet Solis looked physically ill. 347 employees, some within years of retirement, their money just gone. We'll make them whole, Harold said, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure how. Company funds, insurance, whatever it takes. This happened on our watch. We're responsible. Rebecca spoke up for the first time since the vote. The company has reserves, not enough to cover $7 million immediately, but enough to begin restoration while we pursue recovery. I propose we freeze all executive bonuses, redirect that capital to pension fund reconstruction, and commit publicly to full restitution. That'll devastate morale among senior leadership, Patricia Morrison objected reflexively. Good, Rebecca's voice was steel. Maybe it'll remind them that leadership means accountability. We profited from this company while employees' retirements were being stolen. We don't get bonuses until that's fixed. The meeting continued for another hour. Logistics of the forensic audit, coordination with federal investigators, communication strategy with employees and shareholders, legal liability assessment. Ethan provided technical detail where needed, but mostly watched as the board grappled with consequences. By the time Harold adjourned the session, morning had become afternoon. Ethan gathered his materials, physically and emotionally exhausted. He'd done what he came to do, exposed the fraud, protected the victims, forced accountability. But Rebecca had been right. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like damage control. Like stopping bleeding but not healing wounds. 347 people would learn their retirements had been stolen. Many would never fully recover what they'd lost, regardless of corporate promises. Rebecca caught up with him in the hallway. You should know, the board wants to terminate your contract, pay you for completed work, but end the engagement immediately. Ethan wasn't surprised. I'm a liability now. Reminder of failure. Better to remove me and bring in a prestigious firm that can restore confidence. That's what they said, almost word for word. Rebecca's expression was complicated. For what it's worth, I objected. Told them you saved this company from much worse disaster, but I'm barely hanging on to my own position. They ignored me. It's fine, I have other clients, and honestly, I'm ready to be done with Meridian Holdings. Before you go, Rebecca pulled out an envelope. Personal check, not from the company, from me. Call it consulting fees for services the board refuses to properly value. Ethan opened the envelope. Check for $50,000. I can't accept this. You absolutely can. You risked everything, career, safety, ability to provide for your daughter, to do the right thing. Meanwhile, I was CEO while this fraud happened. I missed it, failed to protect people I was responsible for. The least I can do is ensure you're not financially destroyed for fixing my failures. Rebecca, take it, Ethan. Feed your daughter, pay your rent, rebuild your practice, and know that you made a difference here. Those employees will get their money back because you refuse to look away. She paused. That matters. Even if the board won't acknowledge it, it matters. Ethan looked at the check, thinking about Lily, about bills, about the contracts he'd lost while dedicating weeks to this investigation, about the professional reputation he'd risked by filing federal complaints against a client. He folded the check carefully and put it in his wallet. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca offered her hand, for being the person who couldn't be bought or scared or reasoned into looking away. We needed that, even if we didn't want to admit it. They shook hands. Then Ethan walked toward the elevator, toward the exit, toward whatever came next. He stopped at his temporary office long enough to pack the few personal items he'd brought. As he was leaving, his phone rang. David Kelso. They arrested Logan, David said without preamble. FBI. About an hour ago. They had agents waiting outside the building. Soon as security escorted him out, they took him into custody. Fast work. The prosecutor said your documentation made probable cause easy. Combined with my cooperation, they had enough for arrest warrants. David's voice shook slightly. It's real now. This is really happening. It is. How are you holding up? Terrified, relieved, guilty. All of it. A pause. My lawyer says the immunity deal is solid. As long as I testify truthfully, I won't face charges. But I'll lose my career. No IT department will hire someone who testified against their employer, even if I was exposing fraud. Maybe not in corporate IT, Ethan said, but government agencies love whistleblowers. So do nonprofits focused on fraud prevention. You're young enough to rebuild. I hope so.
David sounded lost. I keep thinking about those pension accounts, about people whose lives I helped destroy by following Logan's orders. How do I make that right? You already are. By cooperating. By ensuring Logan faces consequences, by helping recover whatever money can be recovered. Ethan understood the guilt. You can't undo what happened, but you can spend the rest of your career making sure it doesn't happen again. That counts for something. After ending the call, Ethan stood alone in his temporary office one last time, looking around at the space that had been home base for this whole crusade, where he'd first noticed patterns that didn't add up, where he'd built the case that brought down a fraud, where he'd chosen principle over pragmatism and truth over comfort. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Meridian Holdings CFO arrested in pension fraud scheme. The story was already public. Within hours, it would be everywhere. Financial news, local coverage, industry analysis. Logan's name destroyed. The company's reputation damaged. 347 employees learning their retirements had been stolen. Ethan walked to the elevator, pressed the call button, waited. When the car arrived, he stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. Watched the floor numbers descend. Thinking about Lily, about picking her up from school in a few hours, about explaining in 6-year-old terms what Daddy had been working on, about maybe taking her for ice cream to celebrate that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually won. The elevator reached the lobby. Doors opened. Ethan stepped out into afternoon light streaming through tall windows. His phone rang one more time. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, then decided he'd already survived the worst they could throw at him. Ethan Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Amanda Pierce. The board administrator's voice was ice. I'm calling to inform you that your contract with Meridian Holdings is terminated effective immediately. You're required to return all company materials and equipment within 24 hours. A severance check will be mailed to your business address. Understood. Additionally, she paused, as if reading from prepared language. The board has instructed me to inform you that any public statements about your work here, the investigation, or company matters will be considered breach of confidentiality and subject to legal action. Your non-disclosure agreement remains in full effect. The federal investigation is public record. I'm not bound to silence about crimes. We're prepared to pursue all available legal remedies if you violate the NDA. Consider yourself warned. She hung up. Ethan stood in the lobby, holding his phone, processing. They'd fired him, threatened him, tried one last time to intimidate him into silence. But the truth was already out. The arrest was public. The investigation was active. Whatever legal threats the board made now were desperate theater. He walked through the lobby toward the exit, past the security desk where guards nodded recognition, past the elevator banks where his journey had started with a violent stop between floors. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm. People hurrying to meetings, vendors making deliveries, the machinery of commerce grinding forward. Most of them didn't know that in one building, a fraud had collapsed, that careers had ended, that justice, however imperfect, had arrived. But Ethan knew. He'd carry that knowledge with him, along with the exhaustion and the satisfaction and the complicated awareness that winning didn't erase damage, only prevented more. His car waited where he'd left it that morning, ancient but reliable. Ethan got in, started the engine, sat for a moment before pulling into traffic. He thought about Harold Chen's question, "Can we recover it?" The honest answer he hadn't given was probably not all of it. Logan and his co-conspirators had years to hide money. They'd be sophisticated about it, using offshore accounts and shell trusts in jurisdictions that didn't cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. The employees would get something back: company funds, insurance settlements, maybe partial recovery from frozen assets. But full restitution? That was hope, not reality. Still, they'd gotten more than they would have if Ethan had looked away. If he'd accepted Logan's offer of a lucrative ongoing relationship, if he'd chosen his daughter's immediate security over strangers' distant retirements, he'd made the harder choice, the right choice. The choice that would let him look Lily in the eye when she asked about his work and tell her honestly that he'd helped people who needed help. That had to be enough. Ethan pulled into traffic, driving toward Lily's school, toward the afternoon routine of parent pickup and homework and dinner, toward normal life that felt anything but normal after the past month. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen.
News says your client's CFO got arrested for stealing. That the numbers you were fixing? He replied, "That's them. Fixed now." Good. Lily will be proud when she's old enough to understand. I'm proud now. Come to dinner. You look like you need feeding. Ethan smiled, accepting the invitation with gratitude. Tonight he'd let Mrs. Chen feed him and Lily, let himself rest in the temporary sanctuary of people who cared. Tomorrow he'd start rebuilding his practice, reaching out to clients, figuring out how to market himself as the auditor who'd exposed a major fraud without getting destroyed in the process. But tonight, he'd just be Dad, the person who mattered most in Lily's world, the person whose opinion of himself mattered most in his own. He arrived at school pickup with 5 minutes to spare, parked in the usual spot, watched the doors open and children stream out in chaotic joy. Saw Lily spot his car and light up with that smile that made everything else fade to background noise. She climbed into the back seat, chattering about fractions and line leading and Emma's birthday cupcakes, completely oblivious to the war her father had just finished fighting. "How were the numbers today, Daddy?" Ethan looked at her in the rearview mirror, this perfect small person who trusted him completely. "They behaved beautifully, sweetheart. Finally did exactly what they were supposed to do." "That's good. I knew you could fix them." Simple faith. Uncomplicated belief that Daddy could solve problems. Ethan hoped he could keep deserving that faith, keep making choices that held up under her future scrutiny. He drove toward Mrs. Chen's apartment, toward dinner and warmth and temporary peace. Behind them, Meridian Holdings continued its crisis management. Federal investigators continued their work. Logan Reed sat in custody. His empire collapsed. 347 employees started the long process of learning what had been stolen and what might be recovered. But ahead was just a 6-year-old who needed dinner and help with homework and bedtime stories. Ahead was life that continued regardless of corporate drama. Ahead was the future Ethan had protected by refusing to compromise the present. He drove toward it, exhausted and satisfied and ready for whatever came next. The numbers had behaved. Now it was time to live with the consequences. Mrs. Chen's dumplings tasted like forgiveness, though Ethan wasn't entirely sure what he was being forgiven for. Maybe just for being human, for carrying the weight of other people's problems until his shoulders ached, for forgetting sometimes that he deserved rest too. Lily sat beside him at the small kitchen table, feet swinging beneath her chair, recounting her day with the kind of detail that only 6-year-olds could sustain about relatively mundane events. And then Marcus said his dad works with numbers too. But I said my dad is better at numbers because he fixes them when they're broken. And Marcus said numbers can't break. And I said yes they can because you told me sometimes people make numbers lie. She paused, fork hovering over a dumpling. Numbers can lie, right, Daddy? Mrs. Chen glanced at Ethan over her teacup, expression suggesting she'd like to hear this answer too. Numbers themselves don't lie, Ethan said carefully. But people can use numbers to tell lies. They can hide things, or make things look different than they really are. My job is to find where the numbers don't match the truth. And you found some today? I found a lot of them. Over the past few weeks, actually. And today, the people who made the numbers lie had to face consequences. Lily considered this with the seriousness she applied to all matters of justice. Good. Lying is bad. Mrs. Patterson says lying makes everything worse even if you think it's helping. Mrs. Patterson is very wise. They finished dinner in comfortable quiet, punctuated by Lily's observations about everything from the taste of ginger to the way shadows fell across Mrs. Chen's kitchen walls. Normal conversation. Safe conversation. The kind that reminded Ethan why any of the past month had mattered. After dinner, after Lily had helped clear dishes and received her promised praise from Mrs. Chen after the rituals of toothbrushing and pajamas and the selection of bedtime stories, Ethan sat on the edge of his daughter's bed reading about a mouse who solved problems through cleverness rather than force. Lily's eyes grew heavy, her breathing deepened, and by the final page she was asleep with one small hand curled against her cheek. Ethan sat watching her for a while, thinking about the check in his wallet, about the contract he'd lost, about the career he'd need to rebuild. $50,000 from Rebecca would cover nearly 6 months of careful living. Time enough to find new clients, to leverage his newfound reputation as the auditor who couldn't be bought or intimidated. or time enough to discover that reputation cut both ways. The companies wanted auditors who'd find problems quietly rather than expose them publicly. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number, but the message identified itself immediately. Mr. Cole, this is Marcus Webb from Meridian's board. Do you have time for a call tomorrow? I have a proposition that might interest you. Ethan stared at the message, suspicious. The board had just fired him and threatened legal action if he spoke publicly. Now one of them wanted to talk? He typed back. What kind of proposition? The response came quickly. The kind that might help a lot of people, including you. 10 a.m. at the coffee shop on 5th? My treat. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed. Then he returned to watching Lily sleep, to the simple peace of knowing she was safe and fed and loved, regardless of what corporate machinations awaited tomorrow. The coffee shop was busy with mid-morning traffic when Ethan arrived at 9:55 a.m. Marcus Webb sat at a corner table, expensive suit slightly rumpled, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed something on his tablet. He looked up when Ethan approached, standing to shake hands with the formality of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. Thank you for meeting me. I know the board didn't part with you on the best terms. Marcus gestured to a chair. I ordered you a coffee. Black, 2 sugars. Rebecca mentioned that was your preference. Ethan sat cautiously. You've been talking to Rebecca about me. Among other things, she and I have been discussing the future of Meridian Holdings, specifically how to rebuild trust after what Logan did. Marcus removed his reading glasses, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. The company needs fundamental reform, new financial controls, independent oversight, a culture that values transparency over comfort, and frankly, we need someone who can't be compromised to help build that. You want to hire me back? Not as a contractor, as Chief Compliance Officer, full-time position, executive level, reporting directly to the board rather than through the CEO. Your job would be to implement controls that prevent another Logan Reed from ever happening again. Marcus slid a folder across the table. Salary, benefits, equity options. Everything's outlined there. It's a serious offer, Ethan, the kind that would give you stability and your daughter's future some security. Ethan opened the folder without touching the pages. The numbers were significant, more than double what he'd made at his peak with Hartman Associates. Benefits that would cover Lily's health care, education, everything he'd been cobbling together through careful budgeting and strategic sacrifice. Why me? You could hire someone with more prestigious credentials, someone from a Big Four firm with institutional backing. Because those people can be pressured by institutional concerns. They worry about client relationships, firm reputation, partnership tracks. You've proven you can't be pressured, can't be bought, can't be scared into looking away. Marcus leaned forward. The board knows we failed. We trusted the wrong person, missed obvious signs, prioritized comfort over diligence. We need someone who'll make us uncomfortable, who'll ask hard questions and refuse to accept smooth answers. The board fired me yesterday. Part of the board fired you, Harold and Patricia's faction. They're not going to be there much longer. Marcus's expression was grim. The forensic audit is already finding evidence that they knew about irregularities and chose not to investigate. At minimum, they violated fiduciary duty. More likely, they were complicit. The SEC is very interested in some private communications between Patricia and Logan about managing board information flow. Ethan absorbed this. The conspiracy had been deeper than even he'd documented. They were actively helping him cover it up. Appears so. Which means we'll need a new board chairman and at least 2 new directors. Janet and I are coordinating with Rebecca to rebuild governance from the ground up, but we need operational leadership too. Someone in the executive suite who can implement the changes we're mandating. It was tempting. Ethan couldn't deny that. Stability for Lily, a platform to actually prevent fraud rather than just documenting it after the fact. The resources and authority to build something better. But it also meant surrendering the independence that had made him effective, becoming part of the institution rather than its external conscience. I need to think about it, Ethan said. Of course. Take a week. Talk to Rebecca if you want her perspective. She's staying on as CEO, contingent on implementing our reform plan. She speaks highly of you.
She also just wrote me a personal check for $50,000 because the company refused to properly compensate my work. Marcus winced. I wasn't part of that decision.
I voted to pay your full contracted amount plus bonus for the value you delivered. Harold blocked it, said it would set a bad precedent to reward contractors who exceeded their scope. He paused. That's exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to eliminate. They talked for another 20 minutes about the specifics of what the chief compliance officer role would entail, the authority it would carry, the challenges it would face. Marcus was honest about the difficulty. Reforming corporate culture was generational work, not a quick fix. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments when progress felt impossible. But there would also be impact, real structural change that protected real people. Ethan left the meeting with the folder in his briefcase and uncertainty in his mind. He drove without particular destination, eventually finding himself at a park near Lily's school. He sat on a bench watching other people's children play, thinking about futures and choices and what kind of example he was setting. His phone rang. Number he recognized, Jim Henderson, the maintenance worker who'd been planning retirement. Ethan had never actually met Jim, had only seen his name in employee records, but apparently word had spread about who'd exposed the fraud. Mr. Cole, Jim Henderson, I worked maintenance at Meridian. I heard you're the one who found out about our pensions. I am. I'm sorry for what happened. Sorry? Jim's voice was rough, emotional. Son, you saved my life. I'm 62 years old. I was going to retire next year. Had it all planned. Me and Betty were going to drive to Montana, see the grandkids, finally have time for all the things we put off while I was working. That pension was everything, my entire plan. The company says they'll make everyone whole, and they will, because you made them, because you didn't let them hide it.
Because you did your job even when it would have been easier not to. Jim's voice cracked. I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know what you risked or what it cost you, but thank you. You didn't have to care about people like me, but you did. After the call ended, Ethan sat on that bench for a long time, Jim's words echoing. You didn't have to care. That was the thing about most fraud. The victims were faceless to the perpetrators, numbers on spreadsheets, abstractions that could be rationalized away. Logan probably never thought about Jim Henderson specifically, never pictured the 62-year-old maintenance worker whose retirement he was stealing. But Ethan had thought about him, had seen the names and ages and years of service, had understood that every dollar stolen was a day of retirement lost, a grandkid visit postponed, a dream deferred. That's what the job offer meant, the chance to prevent those thefts before they happened, to build systems that protected Jim's and Sandra's across the company, to turn one successful intervention into institutional change. But it also meant becoming part of Meridian Holdings, accepting that the company could reform, that the people who'd enabled Logan could learn better. Ethan wasn't sure he believed that, wasn't sure Harold Chen or the board, even with new members, would actually embrace the discomfort Marcus promised. He needed perspective, needed someone who understood corporate reform and institutional resistance and the gap between promising change and delivering it. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. Marcus told me he met with you. I'm guessing you have questions. Are they serious? About reform? Janet and Marcus are. The others, Rebecca sighed. Some are genuinely shaken and want to do better. Some are just scared of legal liability and will do whatever keeps them safe. But between the three of us, Janet, Marcus, and me, we have enough votes to force real changes. New audit committee with actual independence, mandatory external reviews, whistleblower protections, financial controls that require multiple approvals. What about the culture? You can change policies, but if the underlying culture still values loyalty over honesty, policies just become obstacles to route around. That's where someone like you comes in. As chief compliance officer, you'd be the physical embodiment of the new culture. The person who asks uncomfortable questions in every meeting, who pushes back on smooth explanations, who makes everyone understand that the old way of operating is dead. That's a lot of pressure to put on one position. It is, but you've already proven you can handle it. You stood up to Logan when he had all the power and you had none. Imagine what you could do with actual authority and resources. Rebecca paused. Look, I'll be honest.
This company hurt people. My leadership allowed that to happen. I can't undo that damage, but I can try to make sure it never happens again. I need help doing that. People I can trust. You're on a very short list. Marcus said Harold and Patricia might be forced out. They will be. The forensic team found emails showing they knew Logan was routing excessive fees to related parties and chose not to investigate because CFOs need flexibility to manage complex relationships. That's not oversight. That's negligence at minimum. The SEC is considering charges. Ethan thought about the board meeting, about Harold's hesitation, about Patricia's fierce defense of Logan. Complicity came in many forms. Active conspiracy or passive willful blindness. Either way, people got hurt. If I take this job, I need real authority. Not symbolic. I need the ability to investigate anything, question anyone, and report findings directly without filtering. You'd have it, written into your contract and the board charter. Independent authority with termination protection. They can't fire you without cause demonstrated to regulatory satisfaction. And if I find more problems, more people who need to be held accountable, then you expose them. That's the job. That's what we're committing to. Rebecca's voice was firm. Ethan, I know trust is hard after what happened, but I'm trying to build something better here. Something that actually protects employees instead of exploiting them. I can't do it alone. After the call, Ethan sat with his decision for the rest of the afternoon. He picked up Lily from school, helped with homework about fractions that had her frustrated until he explained them through cookies, made dinner that was acceptable, if not inspired. Normal evening routine that gave him space to think while his hands stayed busy. During Lily's bath, while she played with foam letters and spelled increasingly ambitious words, Ethan's phone buzzed with an email. Subject line: Statement from Meridian Holdings employees. He opened it. A petition signed by 237 employees, two-thirds of the company, thanking him for exposing the fraud and requesting the board hire him permanently to prevent future misconduct. Jim Henderson's name was first on the list. Sandra Kim's was third. Hundreds of others Ethan had never met, never spoken to, whose retirement he'd protected through work they'd never directly witnessed. They were asking him to stay, to keep protecting them. Lily emerged from the bath wrapped in a towel, hair dripping, demanding her bedtime story with the urgency of someone for whom routine was sacred. Ethan dried her off, helped her into pajamas, and settled into the familiar ritual of reading. Tonight's selection was about a builder who worked slowly and carefully, while others rushed and cut corners. The rushed buildings fell down. The careful building stood for generations. That's like your numbers, Lily observed. You do them carefully. I try to. Marcus's dad probably rushes. That's why his numbers break. Ethan smiled. Maybe, or maybe he just hasn't learned the right way yet. You could teach him. Simple logic from a 6-year-old. If someone doesn't know the right way, teach them. Don't abandon them. Don't write them off. Teach them. That's what the chief compliance officer role actually meant. Not just catching fraud, but teaching people how not to commit it. Building systems that made honesty easier than deception. Creating culture where Jim Henderson's retirement was protected not because one auditor noticed it was being stolen, but because structures existed that made such theft impossible. After Lily fell asleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with the job offer in front of him. He thought about Rebecca's words, about the employee petition, about Jim's gratitude and Marcus's proposition, and the simple fact that he had the chance to turn one intervention into institutional prevention. He thought about Lily, about the stability this job would provide, about health insurance that didn't require monthly negotiation and college savings that could actually accumulate. But mostly, he thought about the builder in Lily's story, the one who worked carefully while others rushed, whose building stood for generations. Ethan opened his laptop and composed an email to Marcus Webb. I'll accept the position on the following conditions. 1. Complete investigative independence with direct board reporting. 2. Authority to hire external specialists without approval. 3. Mandatory staff training on fraud detection that I design and deliver personally. 4. Termination protection requiring demonstrated cause. 5. If I find evidence of board-level misconduct, I report it publicly and you don't interfere. These aren't negotiable.
If you agree, I start in 2 weeks. I need time to close my existing practice properly and arrange childcare for the new schedule. He sent it before second-guessing himself. The response came within 10 minutes. All conditions accepted. Contract being drafted tonight. Welcome to Meridian Holdings, Ethan. Let's build something better. The next 2 weeks passed in controlled chaos. Ethan closed his small practice, transferring ongoing clients to a trusted colleague, settling final bills, filing paperwork that officially ended that chapter of his professional life. He felt surprisingly little nostalgia. The independence had been valuable, but also lonely and uncertain. He'd been building a solo practice not because he preferred it, but because it was all he could manage after leaving Hartman Associates. This was different. This was choosing to be part of something, choosing to believe institutions could change if the right people pushed hard enough in the right directions. He toured Meridian Holdings with Rebecca and Marcus, meeting department heads who ranged from genuinely enthusiastic about reform to obviously resentful of the auditor-turned-executive who'd exposed their former CFO. Ethan took careful note of who was which, building mental maps of allies and obstacles. The new office they'd prepared for him was on the 14th floor, 3 doors down from Rebecca's, with windows overlooking the city and a door that locked from the inside. Symbolic protection, but symbols mattered. He was being given physical space that said authority rather than temporary contractor. His first official day began with an all-hands meeting where Rebecca introduced him to the full company. 347 employees packed into the cafeteria, curious and cautious, and in some cases still angry about the pension crisis even though restoration was underway. Rebecca's introduction was brief. Most of you know Ethan Cole as the auditor who exposed Logan Reed's theft of our pension fund. What you might not know is that Ethan had multiple opportunities to look away. He was offered money, threatened with legal action, told his concerns were misplaced. He refused every exit. Instead, he documented everything, filed complaints with federal authorities, and forced us to face truths we'd been avoiding. Because of Ethan's work, the pension fund is being restored. Because of his integrity, Logan and his co-conspirators are facing criminal charges. And because of his commitment to doing what's right regardless of personal cost, I've asked him to join us as Chief Compliance Officer. His job is to make sure what Logan did never happens again. To build systems that protect all of you. To be the person in every meeting who asks the hard questions others might want to ignore. She stepped back, giving Ethan the floor. He approached the microphone, looking out at faces that represented Jim Henderson and Sandra Kim and hundreds of others whose names he knew from files but not from conversation. I'm not here to make friends, Ethan began, deciding honesty was the only viable strategy. I'm here to protect you. Sometimes that'll mean asking your managers uncomfortable questions. Sometimes it'll mean investigating concerns you raise about your departments. Sometimes it'll mean challenging decisions that seem fine on surface but hide problems underneath. If you're doing your jobs honestly, we'll get along fine. If you're cutting corners or hiding mistakes or prioritizing optics over accuracy, we're going to have problems. He paused, letting that sink in. But I also want you to know, I work for you, not for executives, not for the board, for the employees whose retirements and futures depend on this company keeping its promises. If you see something that concerns you, tell me. If you're pressured to do something that feels wrong, tell me. If you think numbers are being manipulated or decisions are being made for bad reasons, tell me. Your jobs aren't to stay quiet and compliant. Your jobs are to do good work and raise concerns when things aren't right. The room was silent. Then someone in the back, Ethan squinted and saw it was Jim Henderson, started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined. Not everyone. Some stood with arms crossed, clearly unconvinced that the auditor who'd gotten their CFO arrested should be given institutional power. But enough applauded that Ethan felt the support, felt the weight of expectation that came with it. After the meeting, employees approached in small groups. Some thanked him. Some asked careful questions about how to report concerns. Some just wanted to shake his hand, to make the person who'd protected their pensions real rather than abstract. Jim Henderson waited until the crowd thinned, then approached with his wife Betty beside him. Jim was exactly as Ethan had pictured, weathered hands, honest face, the kind of person who'd spent 40 years keeping a building functional through small daily acts of maintenance. Mr. Cole, this is my Betty. I wanted her to meet the man who saved our retirement. Betty gripped Ethan's hand with surprising strength. Jim was ready to kill himself when he found out about the pensions. Not joking. We had nothing else. Social Security doesn't cover the medical bills, doesn't pay for the life we'd planned. That pension was everything. Her eyes were fierce. You gave us our future back. Don't you ever forget that you did that. After they left, Ethan stood alone in the emptying cafeteria, processing Betty's words. Jim had been ready to kill himself.
The fraud wasn't just numbers. It was Jim Henderson's entire reason to keep living, stolen by someone who probably never thought about Jim at all. That's what he was preventing now. Not abstract theft, but concrete devastation in real lives. The first month in the new role was brutal. Ethan implemented controls that slowed down processes executives were used to rushing through, required documentation that people insisted was unnecessary, questioned relationships and transactions that had operated on handshake trust for years. He made enemies, made people uncomfortable, made it clear that the old way of doing business was permanently dead. But he also started seeing changes. Managers began asking, what would compliance say, before making decisions? Employees reported concerns they'd previously kept quiet about. Small irregularities got caught and corrected before becoming large frauds. The forensic audit concluded 3 months into Ethan's tenure. The final tally was worse than his preliminary findings. Logan had been stealing for 5 years, not 3, and the total approached $11 million. But the audit also confirmed that current leadership under Rebecca was implementing genuine reforms and cooperating fully with recovery efforts. The criminal trial began 6 months later. Ethan testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through transaction flows and document falsifications and the architecture of Logan's fraud. David Kelso testified for 3 days, explaining how he'd been instructed to create false board materials and manipulate pension records. Patricia Chen and Richard Doyle took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Logan in exchange for reduced sentences. Logan's defense was exactly what Ethan expected: complexity, sophistication, misunderstanding by unsophisticated auditors. His attorneys brought their own financial experts who testified about legitimate uses of shell companies and the acceptability of simplified board presentations. But the jury wasn't composed of financial experts. They were normal people: a teacher, a mechanic, a retired nurse, others who understood pension theft in human terms rather than technical jargon. When the prosecutor showed them Jim Henderson's testimony about nearly committing suicide, when they heard from Sandra Kim about telling her grandchildren she couldn't help with college anymore, when they saw the faces behind the stolen millions, Logan's technical defenses crumbled. Guilty on all counts. 18 years federal prison. Restitution ordered for the full amount stolen plus penalties. Ethan watched the verdict from the gallery, Rebecca beside him, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction. Justice had arrived, but it couldn't undo the trauma, couldn't erase the months Jim and Sandra and hundreds of others had spent believing their futures were destroyed. It just confirmed that theft had consequences. Sometimes. After the trial, after the press coverage faded and the company settled into its new normal, Ethan found unexpected rhythm in the work. He built a compliance team of 6 people, all chosen for their inability to be intimidated and their commitment to protecting employees over executives. They implemented anonymous reporting systems. They trained managers on fraud detection. They audited every major transaction and questioned every irregular pattern. The company resisted at first, then adapted, then eventually internalized the changes. The culture shifted incrementally. Transparency became valued over convenience. Questions became encouraged rather than threatening. People started understanding that compliance wasn't about punishment, but protection. Lily turned 7, then 8. She started asking more sophisticated questions about Ethan's work, understanding now that Daddy's job was to keep bad people from stealing. She told her friends with pride that her father caught criminals, which wasn't exactly accurate, but close enough that Ethan didn't correct her. Mrs. Chen continued providing backup childcare and unsolicited wisdom. When Ethan worried he was working too much, she reminded him that quality mattered more than quantity. When he felt guilty about the stability corporate employment provided versus the independence he'd surrendered, She asked him whether independence that couldn't protect his daughter was really valuable. She had a way of cutting through Ethan's tendency toward overthinking. 2 years after taking the chief compliance officer position, Ethan received a call from an attorney representing 3 former Meridian employees who'd received their full pension restoration plus interest. They wanted to donate a portion back to fund a nonprofit focused on protecting pension rights. They wanted Ethan to run it. He declined the leadership role, but agreed to serve on the board. The nonprofit, eventually named the Henderson Foundation after Jim, who'd agreed to be the public face, became an advocacy organization that helped employees at other companies recognize and report pension fraud. They provided resources, legal connections, and support for whistleblowers. Jim Henderson himself became an activist, speaking at conferences and testifying before Congress about the human impact of white-collar crime. Betty joined him, telling their story to anyone who'd listen. Together, they turned their near tragedy into a mission, ensuring other families didn't face what they'd faced. Ethan watched them work with quiet pride. His investigation had started this. His refusal to look away had created the foundation for everything that followed. The ripple effects extended far beyond Meridian Holdings, touching pension reform policy and corporate governance standards and the careers of young auditors who studied his work as an example of integrity under pressure. But the moment that mattered most came 3 years into his tenure at Meridian, when the company promoted him to executive vice president with expanded authority over all financial operations. The promotion came with a significant raise, substantial equity, and the kind of security that meant Lily's college fund was fully covered and her future was protected regardless of what happened to Ethan's career. The night he received the promotion, Ethan took Lily out for the celebration dinner he'd promised years ago. She was 9 now, old enough to understand the significance even if the details remained fuzzy. "So, you're important now?" she asked over pasta that was definitely better than his home cooking. "I was always important. The job just recognized it officially." "Because you fixed the numbers?" "Because I refused to let broken numbers stay broken." Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I found out people were stealing, I could have ignored it. Would have been easier, safer. But that would have meant letting bad people hurt good people. I couldn't do that. Because it's wrong. Because it's wrong, and because those good people deserved someone who'd fight for them, even when it was hard." Lily considered this, twirling pasta on her fork with concentration. "I want to do that too, when I grow up. Fight for people." "You can do whatever you want. But yes, fighting for people is good work. Will you teach me?" "How to know when numbers are lying?" Ethan felt something catch in his chest. "I'll teach you everything I know." They finished dinner talking about numbers and honesty and the difference between what was easy and what was right. Lily asked questions with the directness of childhood, and Ethan answered with the honesty he'd learned through experience. By the time dessert arrived, she was explaining to him how she'd use financial analysis to catch criminals, her 9-year-old logic mixing with principles he'd taught her into something charmingly ambitious. Walking back to the car, Lily's hand in his, Ethan thought about the elevator that had stopped 3 years ago, about the fear in Rebecca's voice when she'd realized the trap, about the choice he'd made to keep investigating even when it would have been easier to walk away. Every consequence that followed, the destroyed career of a criminal, the protected retirements of hundreds of employees, the reform culture of an entire company, this moment with his daughter talking about fighting for people, all of it traced back to that choice. The elevator had started as a trap, had become a crucible, had transformed into a catalyst for everything that followed. 6 months later, Ethan stood in a small office above a bakery filled with the smell of rising bread and sweet possibilities. The office was modest, 2 rooms, basic furniture, a sign on the door that read Cole & Associates, Financial Integrity Consulting. His new venture, built on the reputation he'd earned at Meridian and the relationships he'd developed through the Henderson Foundation. But he wasn't alone. Rebecca Sloan stood beside him, looking at the same sign with satisfaction. She'd left Meridian 6 months prior after successfully implementing the reforms they'd promised. The company was stable, culture was changed, her work there was complete. Now she was joining Ethan in building something new. "Think we can make this work?" she asked. "We exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud, survived corporate warfare, and rebuilt an entire company's governance structure. A small consulting practice should be manageable. Ethan smiled. Besides, we're not trying to get rich, just trying to help people. Help people and keep the lights on. Don't undersell the importance of rent. They'd structured the practice carefully, focused exclusively on pension protection and financial transparency. Clients would be companies genuinely committed to reform, not those seeking rubber stamps. Fees would be fair, but not exploitative. The goal was sustainable work that protected employees, not prestigious engagements that impressed other consultants. Their first client was already scheduled, a mid-sized manufacturing firm whose employees had reported concerns about their retirement accounts. Exactly the kind of situation where early intervention could prevent later catastrophe. Ethan had hired 2 junior auditors, both young and hungry and committed to the mission over the money. He'd teach them the way his mentor had taught him, methodically, rigorously, with emphasis on understanding that numbers represented real people with real lives. The office building had an old freight elevator that rattled and complained with every use. Ethan and Rebecca rode it up to their second-floor space, the car shaking but functional. When the doors opened, they stepped into their new future. Lily was already there, having convinced Mrs. Chen to bring her after school to see Daddy's new office. She'd brought art supplies and was busily creating a sign for the door, her version of the company name rendered in crayon and glitter with characteristic 9-year-old enthusiasm. "Do you like it?" she asked, holding up her creation. "It says you help people. I added stars because helpers should have stars." Ethan crouched beside her, examining the artwork with appropriate seriousness. "It's perfect. We'll hang it right next to the official sign." "Really? Even though it's not professional?" "It's exactly professional. It reminds people why we're here." Rebecca watched this exchange with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Later, after Lily and Mrs. Chen had left, after they'd finished organizing files and setting up computers, Rebecca mentioned it. "She's lucky. Having a father who shows her that doing right matters more than doing easy. She's the reason I do it. Her and all the other kids whose parents depend on promises being kept." "I know. That's what makes you good at this." Rebecca powered down her computer, gathering her things. "Same reason we'll make this work. We're not doing it for recognition or profit. We're doing it because pension theft is personal to us now. We've seen Jim Henderson's face, heard Betty's voice. We can't unsee that." They locked up the office, descended in the rattling elevator, emerged into early evening streets. The bakery below was closing for the day, the owner waving goodbye through the window. "Same time tomorrow?" Rebecca asked. 8 a.m. We've got the manufacturing firm proposal to finalize." She nodded and walked toward her car. Ethan stood for a moment, looking up at the modest building that housed their new practice. It wasn't impressive, wasn't prestigious. Wouldn't impress the people he'd worked with at Hartman Associates or even some of the executives at Meridian. But it was honest work. Important work. Work that protected people like Jim and Sandra and the 347 employees whose retirements had been stolen and then, against odds, restored. Ethan drove home thinking about trajectories. 3 years ago, he'd been a struggling independent auditor, taking whatever contracts came his way. Now he was building something purposeful, with a partner he trusted and a daughter who understood why it mattered. The path between those points had been anything but straight: elevator traps and corporate warfare and testimony and trials and reforms, and finally, this new beginning. At home, Lily was already working on homework with Mrs. Chen's supervision. Ethan joined them at the kitchen table, helping with math problems that were starting to incorporate actual complexity. Fractions had given way to decimals. Simple addition had evolved into multi-step word problems. Lily approached each challenge with the same determination she'd shown, explaining her artistic vision for the office sign. "Daddy, if someone steals money and then they pay it back, does that mean they didn't really steal it?" Ethan paused, considering the question carefully. "Why do you ask?" "My teacher said stealing is taking something that isn't yours. But if you give it back, maybe it was just borrowing?" The difference is permission. Borrowing means asking first. Stealing means taking without asking. Giving it back after you're caught doesn't erase the theft. It just means you're fixing part of the damage. So the man you caught, even though he gave the money back, he still stole it? He didn't give it back voluntarily. The courts forced him to. And yes, he still stole it. The families he hurt still went through months of fear and uncertainty before the money was restored. You can't give that time back. Lily absorbed this, pencil tapping against her homework. That's sad. It is. That's why preventing theft is better than punishing it. If we can stop people from stealing in the first place, nobody gets hurt. Is that what you do at your new job? Exactly that. I help companies build systems so that theft can't happen, so that employees like the ones at my old company don't have to be afraid. She seemed satisfied with this explanation, returning to her homework with renewed focus. Mrs. Chen caught Ethan's eye over Lily's bent head, giving him a small nod of approval. Teaching morality through real examples, turning work into lessons about integrity. That night, after homework and dinner and the evening rituals, Ethan sat at his own desk reviewing the manufacturing firm's financial records, looking for patterns, testing numbers against reality, doing the work he'd spent years perfecting. His phone buzzed with a message from Jim Henderson. A photo of Jim and Betty standing in front of the Grand Canyon, retirement trip finally happening 3 years later than planned, but happening nonetheless. The caption read, "Living the dream thanks to you. The Henderson Foundation just got its 50th case referral. We're making a difference." Ethan smiled, saving the photo. 50 cases. 50 other companies where employees had raised pension concerns and were being supported through the exposure and resolution process. 50 opportunities to prevent what had happened at Meridian. The ripples kept spreading. A year later, Ethan stood at a podium addressing an auditing conference explaining the Meridian case to hundreds of financial professionals. He walked them through the investigation chronologically, showing how he'd identified red flags and followed evidence despite resistance. The audience was rapt, taking notes, asking questions about technique and approach. But the question that mattered came at the end from a young auditor who couldn't have been more than 25. How did you know it was worth the risk? You could have lost everything. Your career, your ability to provide for your daughter, maybe even your safety. What made you decide the truth was worth that cost? Ethan paused, thinking about elevator traps and corporate threats, and the moment he'd sent that first email to regulators, knowing it couldn't be unsent. I thought about my daughter, about what I'd tell her if she asked what I did when I found out people were being hurt. I couldn't tell her I looked away because it was safer. Couldn't tell her I chose my comfort over other people's futures. So I didn't have a choice, really. The choice was made the moment I understood what was happening. Everything after that was just following through. The young auditor nodded slowly, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression. The understanding that auditing wasn't just about numbers and compliance, but about the people those numbers represented. After the conference, after the networking and the follow-up conversations and the exchange of business cards, Ethan returned to his hotel room and called Lily. She was at a friend's house, Mrs. Chen supervising, having the kind of normal preteen evening that was possible because Ethan's work had created stability. "How was your speech?" she asked when she came to the phone. "Good. I think some people learn things that'll help them do better work." "Did you tell them about fixing the numbers?" "I told them about finding the truth even when it's hard." "That's the same thing though, right? The numbers tell the truth if you know how to listen to them." Ethan smiled. Nearly 11 years old now, and she'd internalized the core principle. Numbers didn't lie if you understood their language. People lied by manipulating numbers, but the truth was always there for someone patient enough to find it. "Exactly the same thing. You're getting very wise, sweetheart. I learned from my dad. He's the best at finding truth." After they hung up, Ethan sat for a while looking out the hotel window at an unfamiliar city. Thought about the path that had brought him here, the elevator that stopped, the fraud he exposed, the lives he protected, the career he built from the wreckage of choosing principle over pragmatism. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, times when the financial pressure or professional isolation made him question whether integrity was sustainable. Times when watching Lily make do with less made him wonder if providing more wouldn't have been the better choice. But then he'd remember Jim Henderson's voice, Betty's fierce gratitude, the 347 employees whose retirements were restored, the 50 cases the Henderson Foundation was supporting. The young auditors learning that truth mattered more than comfort. The elevator had been a trap that became a catalyst. The fraud had been a theft that became a mission. The investigation had been a risk that became a foundation for everything built after. And now, years later, Ethan Cole stood in hotel rooms giving speeches about integrity, ran a consulting practice dedicated to protecting pensions, raised a daughter who understood that helping people was the highest work, partnered with Rebecca Sloan to prevent what they'd once exposed. The path hadn't been straight. The victory hadn't been clean. Justice had arrived, but not without cost. But it had arrived. That was the thing. Against odds and resistance and threat, truth had won. Not because truth always won, Ethan knew better than to believe that, but because this time, at this moment, in this situation, someone had chosen to fight for it. The elevator doors had opened that first day onto a crisis, had opened again months later onto resolution. Now they opened daily onto purpose. Ethan packed his bag, checked out of the hotel, and headed home. Back to Lily and Mrs. Chen and the small office above the bakery. Back to work that mattered, and numbers that told truth, and the quiet satisfaction of building something honest in a world that often rewarded the opposite. The freight elevator rattled as always when he returned to the office the next morning. Rebecca was already there, reviewing files for their newest client. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that came from shared experience and mutual respect. At lunch, they walked to the bakery downstairs. The owner knew them now, always had their usual orders ready. They sat at a small table by the window, eating and talking about cases and approach and the small technical details that comprised their work. "Do you ever miss it?" Rebecca asked. "The prestige, the big firm resources, the salary?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "Mostly I miss the expense account. But then I remember what that came with. The pressure to keep clients happy over keeping them honest. The incentive to find nothing wrong because problems meant litigation risk. The culture that valued billable hours over actual impact. We're making less money doing more important work." "Sounds about right," Ethan smiled. "But Lily's college is funded. Mrs. Chen has enough that I can pay her properly for childcare instead of relying on her charity. I sleep well at night knowing the work we did today protected real people. I'll take that over prestige." They finished lunch and returned to the office, climbing the stairs because the elevator was occupied. On the second-floor landing, they passed Jim Henderson coming down. He'd become a regular visitor, the Henderson Foundation working closely with Cole and Associates on cases. "Ethan, Rebecca, good timing. I wanted to tell you, Case 53 just settled. Complete pension restoration, criminal charges filed, board resignations. Another company saved." Jim's smile was enormous. "That's another few hundred families who won't go through what Betty and I did." After Jim left, Ethan stood in the stairwell for a moment, processing. Case 53 companies where employees had raised concerns and gotten justice instead of retaliation. 53 frauds caught early instead of festering. Hundreds of families protected, all because one elevator had stopped, one auditor had asked questions, one choice had been made to pursue truth over comfort. The work continued. Cases came and went. Some they solved quickly, others took months of patient investigation. Some involved small thefts, others massive conspiracies. But each one represented real people depending on systems working correctly, on promises being kept, on someone caring enough to verify that the numbers reflected reality. Years accumulated. Lily graduated from high school, got accepted to college with a full scholarship supplemented by the fund Ethan had built. Mrs. Chen retired from informal childcare, but continued providing wisdom and dumplings in equal measure. Rebecca married a nonprofit executive she'd met through advocacy work. Jim and Betty celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together fraud victims they'd helped, auditors they'd inspired, and the extended family that had nearly been destroyed by Logan's theft. Ethan's practice grew steadily. Not explosive growth, but sustainable expansion. More junior auditors trained in the methodology. More companies served. More pensions protected. The work became almost routine in its importance, the daily practice of preventing harm through diligent attention to truth. But he never forgot where it started. The elevator. The fear. The choice. On the 10-year anniversary of exposing the Meridian fraud, Ethan received an invitation to speak at Jim Henderson's retirement party. Real retirement this time, happening by choice at 72 rather than forced by stolen savings. The party was held at a community center, crowded with people whose lives intersected with the Meridian case. Employees who'd gotten their pensions back, auditors who'd been inspired by the investigation, journalists who'd covered the trial, advocates who'd joined the mission of protecting pension rights. Ethan brought Lily, now 17 and planning to major in forensic accounting. She'd grown up hearing stories about the case, had learned to analyze financial statements alongside learning to drive. The work had shaped her the way his mentor's teaching had shaped him. When Jim asked Ethan to say a few words, he stood before the assembled crowd with the same nervousness he'd felt giving testimony a decade earlier. But the words came easier now. 10 years ago, I was a struggling auditor who took a routine contract expecting boring work. Instead, I found a fraud that tested everything I believed about responsibility and courage and what we owe to strangers. I had a lot of opportunities to walk away, to accept explanations, to take money and look the other way. I didn't, primarily because I thought about my daughter and what I'd tell her about the choice I'd made. He glanced at Lily, who was listening with the attention she'd always given his work stories. What I didn't know then was that the choice would define everything after, that it would lead to a career protecting people, that it would inspire others to ask hard questions in their own work, that it would create a foundation helping hundreds of families. All I knew was that Jim Henderson and his co-workers deserved someone who'd fight for them. Ethan paused, emotion catching unexpectedly in his throat. Jim, Betty, and everyone here who was affected by that theft, you changed my life by letting me be part of your justice. You taught me that numbers aren't abstract, they're promises. And when those promises are broken, someone has to care enough to demand they be kept. Thank you for trusting me to be that someone. The applause was warm and sustained. Afterward, people approached to share their own stories of how the Meridian case had influenced their work, their advocacy, their understanding of corporate accountability. But the moment that mattered most came when Lily pulled him aside, her expression serious in the way that meant important conversation. Dad, I've been thinking about my thesis topic. For senior year, I want to write about the ethics of auditing, about how you chose truth when it would have been easier to choose comfort, about what we owe to people we'll never meet. She paused. Would you help me? Not write it, but guide me through understanding what that choice actually meant? Ethan felt the weight of legacy in her question. The knowledge that his choice 10 years ago had created ripples extending into his daughter's worldview, her career ambitions, her sense of right and wrong. Of course, but Lily, you should know that choice costs things. Friendships, opportunities, security, at least temporarily. I don't want you romanticizing it. I'm not. I understand there was cost, but there was also purpose. You helped people, built something important, showed me that work could mean something beyond a paycheck. She met his eyes with an intensity that reminded him of Betty Henderson. I want to do work like that, work that matters. You taught me that was possible. Driving home that night, Lily asleep in the passenger seat after the long evening, Ethan thought about trajectories again. The elevator trap had led to investigation, which led to exposure, which led to reform, which led to advocacy, which led to mission, which led to this moment. His daughter choosing a future shaped by the values he'd demonstrated through action rather than just preached through words. The path still wasn't straight, would never be straight, but it was purposeful, honest, important. He pulled into his driveway, gently woke Lily, walked together into the house that Stability had purchased. Mrs. Chen had left lights on for them, a note on the counter saying there were dumplings in the refrigerator that just needed reheating. Ethan heated the dumplings while Lily changed for bed. They ate together at the kitchen table, comfortable silence between them. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, a father and daughter shared a meal, earned through integrity maintained across years of choices. When Lily finally went to bed, Ethan sat alone at that kitchen table, thinking about Jim's party, about the lives touched by one investigation, about the daughter whose future had been shaped by watching her father choose truth when comfort would have been easier. The elevator had stopped 10 years ago, had trapped him with a CEO who whispered fear, had forced a choice between safety and responsibility. Now it ran smoothly in the building above the bakery, carrying Ethan to work each morning. The rattle remained, the mechanical complaints continued, but the doors opened reliably onto purpose. That's all any of them could ask for. Doors that opened. Purpose that mattered. work that protected people who trusted promises. Ethan turned off the lights and headed to bed, knowing tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that numbers could tell truth if someone cared enough to listen. The elevator had been a trap, had become a choice, had transformed into a life's work. And that work continued, one case at a time, one protected pension at a time, one lesson taught to one daughter who'd carry the mission forward after her father was gone. The doors kept opening, the work kept mattering, the numbers finally behaved.